Chapter 61. John slowly walked to Robson's desk and picked up the commission form. Robson stopped spacing out. "Robson, I'll take this job." He said it as if it were nothing important. "John, you..." Robson looked at John. "I'm short on money lately, so I'll take this job." John interrupted Robson and walked away without looking back. Robson watched John, knowing that John was a young man with a sense of righteousness who couldn't stand scumbags. John, who had just come out of the Sky Arena, wasn't short of money either and would definitely not protect a scumbag for that reason. Robson grabbed John's shoulder. "There's no need. I've already decided to protect that bastard. No need to go against your conscience, you're still young. Let me do this kind of thing." John left. Working in Robson's studio was originally to repay Robson for a favor. Anyway, he wouldn't be staying in this studio forever, so there was no need to consider how they would see him in the future. However, if Robson took the job, it would ruin everyone in the studio's view of him. John wanted to take it upon himself, and he could secretly sabotage the mission target while carrying out the mission. "Don't act rashly. If you kill that man, they will retaliate against your relatives and friends," Robson warned. He was afraid that John would act recklessly and help the masked knight assassinate the Black Mafia pawn, Mitchell. He had encrypted John's family's information, but the Black Mafia could still find it if they wanted to. "I'm not that stupid." John paused, waved his hand, and signaled him to rest assured. He was Sigmund, also known as the recently rumored Masked Knight. Sigmund had loved watching superhero tokusatsu dramas since he was a child. When he was 12 years old, he learned nin abilities while rescuing trafficked children from human traffickers on the roadside. The following year, he took the hunter exam and became a hunter. Later, he became a crime hunter under the tutelage of Badabai. However, he disregarded the big figures behind those criminals, and eventually, he angered one. Afterward, all his relatives were killed. Those big figures also put pressure on the government, and Sigmund became a wanted criminal. They had no idea they had unleashed a monster. Since then, no one knew Sigmund's whereabouts, and Sigmund became a lone wolf. However, he was not blinded by hatred, and he still upheld his own justice. He only took action after collecting evidence of the other party's crimes. In the past few years, he had been dealing with small fries who couldn't get on the table. 3 years ago, he found evidence of his enemy's crimes and killed that big figure, finally appearing before the eyes of the powerful. Sigmund had been killing managers of Black Mafia businesses, greatly affecting their operations. Therefore, the Black Mafia decided to use bait to lure Sigmund out, deliberately leaking the crimes and whereabouts of the money launderer, Schelling. Sigmund had actually sensed that this might be bait, but he still went. "For that sense of righteousness, though 1,000 may stand against me, I will go." Sigmund dragged a suitcase with a rough, stone-like mask-shaped craft hanging on it. On closer inspection, it wasn't scary at all, but rather exaggerated and childish. Suddenly, a man bumped into Sigmund, and the mask attached to the suitcase fell off. "I'm sorry, I bumped into you." The man scratched his head and apologetically helped Sigmund pick up the mask. "It's okay, I was standing in your way." Sigmund quickly squatted down and picked up the mask himself. Sigmund would never hand the mask over to someone else. "Oh, is that a craft?" The man pointed to the mask in Sigmund's hand. "Yes, it's a gift for a friend." Sigmund said goodbye to the man, straightened his hat, and walked out of the waiting room. Sigmund took a taxi and found a small hotel to stay in. Sigmund wasn't a reckless person. Before taking action, he would first investigate the opponent's situation and choose the best time to strike. After being wanted, Sigmund asked his master, Badabai, to make him a fake ID, and he also changed his appearance to prevent those people from finding him. He easily booked a room in the hotel with the fake ID and then went out to eat. On the surface, he was eating, but in reality, he was using the guise of eating to gather information, staking out the restaurant at the entrance of the heartless boss Schelling's company. Sigmund pushed open the door and went in. There weren't many people inside. It was already past 4 in the afternoon, and the company employees hadn't gotten off work yet. Only a few people were eating here and there. A young man who looked like a middle school student was sitting at the table across from Sigmund. The young man held a strangely shaped tomato-like thing in his hand and then threw it into his noodles and started eating. The tomato-like object disappeared after touching the noodles. Sigmund looked at John and sure enough, a thin layer of nin was attached to his body. It was Ren, Sigmund was very sure. He guessed that this young man was likely related to the heartless boss Schelling. Sigmund picked up his noodles and sat down across from the young man. Young man, it's not a holiday now, why aren't you in school? I've temporarily dropped out of school. What a nosy uncle, John labeled Sigmund. Because there is no compulsory education in this world, there are many people who do not study. If there was such a thing, the Hunter x Hunter story could not continue, because the protagonist, Gon, should be in middle school at this age. Sigmund didn't use in, nor did he use Ren, and the chi on his body was randomly releasing a small amount of chi. John didn't take Sigmund seriously either. This is the performance of someone who doesn't know Nen. Ordinary people whose aura nodes have not been opened will also release Nen all over their bodies. However, it is all discontinuous, scattered, and disorganized Nen, and the amount is very small. John instantly determined that Sigmund was not an Nen user. But Sigmund discovered that John used Ren. Sigmund felt that John must know something and came to get some information. However, Sigmund was destined to be disappointed. John had not been here for long, and had been staying at home before and did not know the situation here. He was just about to go meet the heartless boss Schelling that he was protecting, but he was hungry, so he decided to eat something first before going in. If Sigmund had come later, he might have asked for more information. Seeing that he couldn't get any information from John, Sigmund didn't talk much and started eating his noodles. Chapter 62. John left. It was time to meet that boss. Guided by a staff member using the letter of recommendation, John entered the company. The staff member led John to the 32nd floor, where Schelling was located. The staff member stopped there. Well, a large wooden door with rich and beautiful carvings, and some areas with gold-plated decorations. It looked expensive at first glance. Damn capitalism. John pushed the door open, unexpectedly it wasn't heavy at all. John opened it with a light push. But that's not surprising, this isn't the testing gate of the Zaldik family, and Schelling is just an ordinary person who can't push a very heavy door. With a click, the door was pushed open, and the environment of the office was revealed before John's eyes. Big, very big, the room was very spacious. Clean with not too much decoration, but it was obvious that these limited decorations were very precious. This isn't Schelling's office, this should be a reception room or something. There was no desk here, no piles of documents. There were no huge floor-to-ceiling windows, not even a window. The walls were painted white, and a beautiful crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling. Several people were already sitting at the table, with their legs crossed. John couldn't help but look at one of them, a familiar face. John was immediately on high alert. He even had the urge to run away. To be precise, this was John's first time meeting him, but John recognized him at a glance. Silva Zaldik. Silva can complete the superb technique of taking out an enemy's heart with his bare hands without a drop of blood. Silva's reaction speed is very fast, and his combat experience is also very terrifying. King Crimson's Time Erasure is a first encounter kill skill. Once the sneak attack fails, it is almost impossible to kill Silva. Silva sensed John's gaze and looked at John. Not only Silva, but everyone else sitting here also looked at John. "Kid, this is not a place for you," a scarred, Mediterranean uncle yelled. Did he not know that John was an user? No, he knew that John was an user. Without using Gyo, he could see the thin layer of Nen on the surface of John's body. This is the most basic way to distinguish Nen users, to see if the other party knows Nen. This made John calm down. These should be bodyguards Schelling hired to protect him from being killed by Sigmund. In other words, Silva wasn't here to seek revenge. But on second thought, the Zaldik family bases everything on whether the task is completed and whether the business is losing money. It seems unlikely that he would seek revenge for Illumi. Besides, John let Illumi go and didn't kill him. If Silva wanted revenge, he would have come long ago, he wouldn't have waited until now. Thinking of this, John breathed a sigh of relief. Since Silva wasn't here to kill him, then what was he afraid of? Why are you a random face acting so tough? I can't beat Silva, but I can beat you. Don't I have any face? John didn't want to protect the black-hearted boss Schelling in the first place, and he was already full of anger. Now the scarred uncle ran into the muzzle. Is this the legendary protagonist's must-have face-slapping routine? After so long, I finally got to enjoy the treatment a protagonist should have. John's eyes changed. What kind of spirit is this? John's eyes were no longer filled with fear, but with a cold expression towards people, but he still couldn't hide the joy in his heart. "I'm here to be a bodyguard. What kind of people are here? Are you trying to scare away the killer with your face?" the refined and easygoing John politely retorted. "Damn it, you little brat." The scarred face suddenly stood up and glared fiercely at John, a short knife condensed in his hand. "Is he a materialization type non user?" John confirmed the scarred face's ability. "This wave is stable." John thought so. A powerful Nen aura burst out from John's body. This is Ren, one of the Nen application techniques, expelling aura from the pores. This is a demonstration, showing his amount of Nen. But an even larger Nen aura erupted from the scarred face's body. The scarred face's aura was a little stronger than John's current aura. This was embarrassing, the boasting failed a bit. In fact, John's amount of Nen isn't very outstanding, and John is young, so he is slightly inferior. "Humph, you little brat, are you stupid? Go back and practice more," the scarred face said arrogantly. John was a little ashamed and annoyed, and decided to teach him a lesson. Looking at the tense two people, the others didn't have any intention of dissuading them. They also wanted to see the details of their teammates, especially Silva. Silva had seen John's information half a month ago. He had fought a few well-known battles in the Heavens Arena. But the most outstanding thing was that he cut off one of his eldest son's arms half a month ago. Silva knew very well the strength of his eldest son. It was the first time he had seen him beaten so badly by someone of the same age. Moreover, Illumi didn't know how he lost his arm, didn't know what means John used, and listed him as one of the targets not to be killed for less than 5 billion. Silva hoped to see what John's fighting power was like. John lost in the amount of Nen, but you must know that John's strongest point is not Nen ability. John's capital for arrogance is his stand ability. The scarred face rushed over with the short knife in front of his face. His speed was very fast, but that was it. His grin matched with his scarred face could scare the timid to tears. But his speed was just like that, a little faster than John, but it was far from enough to sneak attack John and kill him with one blow. The scarred face's short knife must have special abilities. John didn't dare to be careless. The blade is indeed very restrained to stone free, the damage of blades and other sharp objects to stone free is indeed very large. So this time John didn't summon the commonly used stone free, but summoned the newly acquired Silver Chariot. Silver Chariot's blade is one section longer than the scarred face's blade. With Silver Chariot's attack speed close to the speed of light, if the scarred face can still attack John can live stream eating shit. Although it was summer, John was still wearing a windbreaker and gloves. So everyone couldn't see that John's entire hand had turned silver, and a rapier materialized in his hand. John elegantly and handsomely twirled the sword, put one hand behind his back and watched the scarred face approach. The scarred face also saw the sword that John materialized, and knew that John's attack distance was longer than his own. But the scarred face was still not afraid, because his ability was not that simple. The scarred face threw the dagger in his hand around him. In the air, the dagger split into 6 and flew towards John. But all of this was in John's epitaph prediction. Silver Chariot instantly attacked, his arms blurred, the blade turned into afterimages, and the dagger was instantly knocked down. Silver Chariot drilled out of his body. Silver Chariot, which had already removed its armor, was very fast. After 0.1 seconds, it appeared in front of the scarred face. The scarred face hadn't reacted to the fact that his ultimate move was instantly defeated. It was too late when he reacted, he had already entered Silver Chariot's attack range. The scarred face condensed another dagger in his hand, but Silver Chariot's attack speed solved the speed of light, and dozens of blood holes were instantly added to the scarred face's hands and feet. Ah! The scarred face let out a scream. Silver Chariot twirled the sword and returned to John's side. Chapter 63. What a load of trash. This kind of loser wants to imitate Dio without time stop. A throwing knife without time stop has no soul. The other onlookers didn't move. First, it's none of their business, so there's no need to wade into this muddy water. Second, they probably didn't react so quickly to Scarface being instantly killed. This move stunned everyone present. Silva was also very surprised. He had seen John's fighting videos from the Heavens Arena before. John didn't know swordsmanship at that time, and the conjured Nen beast has also changed. The faces of everyone present suddenly became serious. This speed is too dangerous. No one present can underestimate John anymore. Ah! Scarface was still lying on the ground, wailing. Clap clap clap, a middle-aged uncle with his hair combed meticulously and wearing a suit took the lead in applauding. John raised his eyebrows. Looking over, the others didn't show any expression, but their eyes were full of fear. "Young man, you're very strong. May I ask your name?" The suit man asked John politely. "John, from Robson's studio," John replied. "I am Cheryl, your employer," the suit man said, extending his hand to shake John's hand. John glanced at Cheryl, not expecting him to be that black-hearted boss. Deliberately ignoring Cheryl's invitation to shake hands, he looked at the others. "I said, who else wants to learn from me?" John said arrogantly. No one responded, and Cheryl awkwardly lowered his hand. After witnessing the speed of John's silver chariot, the others all shrank their heads and had no objections. This is because John was sure that Silva would not fight him for such a boring reason. Including John, there are a total of 6 bodyguards this time, but Scarface has been crippled by John and cannot recover in a short time. That is to say, there are a total of 5 people in this operation. However, John discovered that this time it wasn't just Silva, but there was also someone John recognized. This was a minor character who only appeared at the beginning of the plot, appearing in only one episode. John didn't have much of an impression of him. He has a kidney-deficient face, and his body is quite thin. You can tell at a glance that he has been masturbating too much. He is the future Inju, one of the 10 Don's lackeys. I don't know if he has joined the Inju group yet. His existence is mainly to highlight the power of Yuvajin of the Phantom Troop, that is to say, he is a tool person. The ending is also very tragic, being sprayed to death by Yuvajin, who is also an enhancer, with skull fragments. The most famous thing about the sickle weasel is its super-fast movement speed and the neurotoxin on its teeth. Once bitten, the neurotoxin enters the body and the opponent will lose control of their body. But it's useless. John's ability hard counters him. Silver Chariot's near-light speed attacks won't give him a chance, and his neck isn't as long as Silver Chariot's sword, and his defense is low. The most deadly thing is that his proud toxin is vulnerable in front of Pearl Jam. It can be said that Silver Chariot can beat Sickle Weasel to a pulp. My hand is longer than yours, my speed is faster than yours, and you can't withstand the opponent's attack. What kind of suffering is this in the world? Playing snakes? After watching John's Silver Chariot battle, Sickle Weasel came up with this idea in his mind. Of course, Sickle Weasel is still arrogant, and he has no grudges with John and will not fight. But undoubtedly, John's ability is what he is most unwilling to face. John just took a few more glances at Sickle Weasel. After all, he is just a kidney-deficient ugly loser, not a beauty, so John didn't pay much attention. However, he is still very concerned about the cup that Sickle Weasel used. What if he secretly changed the cup and made himself infected with rabies? Although it is not the incurable disease of the previous life, it is still a very troublesome disease. The others also gave a brief introduction. Apart from Silva Zaldik, everyone only knew that he was from the Zaldik family of assassins, and they didn't know any other information. But no one provoked him. A man's name is like the shadow of a tree. Fighting with the Zaldik family is like the old man of the South Pole eating arsenic, courting death. This is the prestige of the Zaldik family in the dark world. No one disturbed Silva. He planned to solve the masked hero who came to assassinate him alone. This would be considered arrogance if it were someone else, but if it were Silva Zaldik, it could only be said to be confidence. This is the Zaldik family's rule, not to cooperate with outsiders to prevent outsiders from stabbing them in the back and dragging them down. However, he doesn't mind letting others go first to explore the way for him. The Zaldik family of assassins is very happy to let others help him consume the target's stamina. Just like the time they fought the boss, they only took action after all the other mercenaries were dead. One is to consume the target's stamina, the second is to find out the opponent's ability, and the third is to legally and reasonably eliminate competing peers. One move with multiple gains. The Zaldik family's commission is given per person. For example, Cheryl's commission this time is to kill the masked hero. If the masked hero is killed by outsiders like John and Sickle Weasel, he will also receive the full commission. He only guarantees that the target will die, as for how they die, they don't care. John also sat on the table, started crossing his legs, and enjoyed the tea. Scarface, who had been spitting blood on the ground, was quickly cleaned up by the staff. What John didn't know was that Silva was already very afraid of John. In fact, John and Silva have a 50-50 chance of winning in a fight. This is still in a fight. If you focus on running away, John is 100% successful in running away. This requires hiding it from the eyes of the veteran Silva. This is difficult but very challenging. The time deleted by Crimson King can be captured by surveillance cameras. To complete the magic trick of turning a living person into a new person, the problem of surveillance must be solved first. John drank tea and racked his brains. Silva looked at the magazine. Sickle Weasel played mobile games. The other two people were also doing their own things. At the same time, Sigmund sat on the bed in the hotel, sorting out his clothes, checking the props, and then gently stroking a photo frame, which contained a family photo. Sigmund put the family photo on the table next to the TV, then put on the windbreaker on the chair and twisted the door open. Chapter 64. Zellen's commission wasn't open-ended. If no one came to kill Zellen within a week, everyone could take the money and leave. Zellen had invited these bodyguards for a week. If the assassin came after that week, it would be extremely easy to deal with. This indicated that Zellen was certain the assassin would strike within this time frame. John was also curious how Zellen was so sure the masked bandit would attack soon. John suspected it was deduced from the masked bandit's pattern of attacks. Unexpectedly, facing John's question, Zellen directly told John, "It's not a deduction, it's a prophetic letter." A prophetic letter. You're an outsider, so you don't know. Some people in our underworld families have the superpower to predict the future, but it cost me a bit of a price. Zellen explained cheerfully. Surprisingly, the black-hearted boss Zellen didn't seem like a bad person, which might be because he needed John and the others to protect his life. The others showed great interest. Of course, that was it. To them, it was just an user with prophetic abilities. John's own epitaph could also predict, but the time frame was a bit short. Hearing Zellen's answer reminded John of someone in the original work who possessed prophetic abilities, Neon Nostrade, the mafia heiress with a penchant for collecting human organs who later became Kurapika's employer. Her ability was Lovely Ghost Writer, which was later stolen by Krollo Lucilfer. This ability could predict the events of the next month for a person, given their name, date of birth, and blood type. However, it was predicted in the form of a 4-line divination poem, but she herself wouldn't look at the divination poem, believing that this was the only way to predict accurately. John glanced at Silva without a trace. Speaking of which, Killua was already training at the Heavens Arena, which meant that the low N7 Dragon Ball's Aluka wishing spirit had already been locked up by him. This could be said to be what John feared the most. As long as he hid in the mirror world, theoretically, no one could kill him, but Aluka's attack was curse-based, so hiding anywhere was useless. This was also the reason why John didn't dare to antagonize the Zaldik family. It was 8:20 p.m. Today was a new moon, and shining stars filled the night sky, a rare sight in this city. Also, because of industrial pollution, such scenes were rare. However, patches of dark clouds were moving in the sky, gradually obscuring the stars and the moon. It was a dark and windy night, perfect for murder. The streets were bustling with people and traffic, showing no signs of the destruction caused by Malak a few days ago. Sigmund carried a briefcase and walked alone on the road that had not yet been repaired. This road had less traffic because it had just been worked on. With some distance to go, Sigmund took a bite of the grilled kidney and pork intestines he had just packed from the barbecue shop. He walked and ate, and after finishing, he casually threw the packaging bag into the trash can and continued walking. "Hey, stop right there!" Sigmund's mind tightened, and he mechanically turned his head. An old woman picked up the packaging bag that Sigmund had just discarded. "Don't you know that your new city is a key city for promoting garbage sorting? Pay a fine of 200 jenny." Sigmund's expression was indifferent, and he breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. He thought someone had discovered his whereabouts. Sigmund used the powerful physical qualities of an user to run away. Without any hesitation, Sigmund had no money on him. Who brings cash when assassinating? The cash in his pocket had already been used to buy food. He still had to go to the hotel to get the money, which would miss the opportunity. So, Sigmund ran away without hesitation. "Damn it, you have the guts to litter, but you don't have the guts to pay the fine. What kind of black-clad hero are you pretending to be? Damn!" The old woman chased for a distance before Sigmund escaped. Helpless, the old woman returned to the trash can. She squatted in a small corner in the shadows 5 or 6 meters away from the trash can, waiting for the next person to litter, as fishing enforcement was the only way to achieve performance. Sigmund was even more lonely. He took out a deodorant spray from his pocket and sprayed it on his face. But the smell of intestines still lingered. Damn it, the shop that sold grilled intestines didn't wash the intestines clean. He didn't notice it just now because it was too spicy, but now his mouth was full of the taste. Here it comes. Sigmund arrived at the building where Zellen's company was located. The company's employees had already gone home. The rare black-hearted boss Zellen didn't keep a single person overtime today, leaving everyone puzzled. Little did they know that Zellen had already calculated that the compensation for employees who died due to the aftermath of the battle was much higher than the overtime pay. Zellen had a clear understanding of this account. Wearing a mask, Sigmund stood in front of the company building. All the lights on all floors were turned on. This was a ruse to prevent Sigmund from determining which floor Zellen was on. Of course, another reason was to ensure the operation of the surveillance cameras. The door had been locked, but Sigmund was the proud masked bandit, a powerful non-user. How could a small glass door trap him? Sigmund put his hand on the glass window next to him, and then suddenly burst out. The glass window instantly shattered with a crackling sound. Sigmund entered the company through the window. There was no one inside. All the computers had been turned off, and there was no one in the security room. John and the others had already set off. They had already discovered Sigmund through the surveillance cameras when he approached the company. Sigmund walked to the elevator and found that the elevator was coming down from upstairs. Someone upstairs had pressed the elevator button. Sigmund stood in front of the elevator door, waiting. Waiting for the elevator door to open and eliminate the opponent inside the elevator. 4th floor, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, 1st floor. Sigmund's mind was tense. Sigmund gathered Nan on his mask, and the mask on his face had changed, with intricate and gorgeous patterns appearing, turning into a black and white demon mask. Hell messenger, Sigmund muttered in his heart. The elevator door opened. Chapter 65. Empty, no, that's not right. Sigmund, with his sharp eyes, noticed a time bomb inside, and a chill swept through his body as he retreated violently. The sense of crisis grew stronger, without the slightest reduction. Tick tick tick, the bomb didn't explode immediately. Could it be that? Sigmund turned around and noticed a figure behind him. Perhaps all his focus was on the elevator and the bomb inside, he hadn't noticed someone approaching from behind. His hair stood on end as a bald, buck-toothed uncle wearing a white scarf jumped into the air. I/. The uncle looked lewd, but his voice was surprisingly righteous. A terrifying nun was concentrated on the blade. The people Sigmund had killed before were all unprepared, but this time was different. Schelling had predicted the date and hired professionals to assassinate him. The danger was far beyond anything he had faced before, and this I/. was definitely not simple. Taking it head-on would surely lead to misfortune. In theory, Sigmund didn't have the speed to evade this strike, but he immediately adjusted his mindset. Sigmund didn't make any movements, and the patterns on his mask changed. This is a sure thing, the buck-toothed man confirmed in his heart. Once this strike reaches this distance, even the strongest in the world would have to kneel. This was the buck-toothed man's delusion. The bald, buck-toothed man's mouth twisted into a grin. He knew Sigmund's abilities might be troublesome, so he wanted to quickly kill him and not give him time to unleash his powers. Just as he thought this, two hands suddenly reached out from behind and pulled the buck-toothed man backward. The buck-toothed man's attack was immediately disrupted, and this pull broke his rhythm, giving Sigmund a chance to dodge. At the same time, a black ghoul appeared behind the buck-toothed man. The hands that stopped the attack belonged to it. The ghoul was nearly 2 meters tall, quite thin but still relatively normal, with the traditional Chinese character, 3, written on its forehead. This was undoubtedly an beast. The buck-toothed man forcibly changed his sword's trajectory and turned the blade to slash at the beast behind him. The blade passed through the body of the beast, the third ghoul apostle, and the part of the beast that the blade touched became illusory. The blade seemed to pass through water vapor, without resistance. Once the blade passed, the beast's body solidified again, without any injuries. What is this thing? Die, bastard! The buck-toothed man performed several more slashes, but the beast wasn't harmed at all. The brief attack allowed the buck-toothed man to confirm one thing: this beast seemed unable to be attacked. When the buck-toothed man attacked just now, he left several openings, but this beast remained unmoved. In other words, this beast either had other special abilities or was a disruptive type. The buck-toothed man guessed correctly on this point. The third ghoul apostle had no offensive power whatsoever, the third ghoul apostle's ability was only for support. The third ghoul apostle was to add 200 pounds of weight to the opponent, and nothing else. This move could also interrupt the opponent's attack, the real attack still had to be launched by the main body. The ability of the fourth Hellbringer that Sigmund opened just now was also a support-type ability. The fourth Hellbringer's ability was clairvoyance, but it couldn't see through long-distance objects. For example, he couldn't see shelling on the 30th floor because the distance was too far and there were too many obstructions, and the Hellbringer could only see through inanimate objects. Fifth Apostle, Western Gunslinger. The patterns on Sigmund's mask changed again, and a revolver suddenly materialized in his hand. The trench coat on his body also turned into Western cowboy-style clothing. The buck-toothed man's body felt lighter, and the nun-beast behind him had disappeared. Sigmund could only use the ability of one apostle at a time, that is to say, if he used one apostle, he couldn't use other abilities. Sigmund fired. Bang, bang, bang. In an instant, several fire snakes spurted out from the barrel of the dark gold revolver in succession. The buck-toothed man, who had just broken free from the shackles of the nun-beast, saw the pistol materialized by Sigmund. Because he was still slashing at the nun-beast just now, his posture was awkward and he couldn't dodge. Realizing that he couldn't avoid it, the buck-toothed man hardened his heart and used the fastest speed in his life to launch a full-force thrust at Sigmund's chest. Oh no, it ry. Thundering straight thrust. The buck-toothed man wasn't the kind of rookie swordsman that John had encountered in the hunter exam before. The buck-toothed man had obtained the Menkyokaden qualification in the Ono at Ry, a famous school with a long history. He could defeat 20 fellow disciples without nun abilities. This was the fastest strike he had made since he learned the sword, and the speed had reached a terrifying 3 times the speed of sound. The distance between the buck-toothed man and Sigmund was only 5 meters. In an instant, a huge force came, unable to advance half a step, and blood gushed out. The buck-toothed man fell powerlessly in front of Sigmund. At this time, Sigmund was only 50 centimeters away from the buck-toothed man. There were fist-sized blood holes in the left chest and right arm where the heart was located, and the last bullet was dodged and hit the ground. Ono Hihachir, the buck-toothed man, fell down in confusion and unwillingness. His vision gradually blurred, and so did his consciousness. Sigmund's Western gunslinger looked like a revolver, but its power was comparable to a shotgun, and the speed of the bullets could reach 5 times the speed of sound. However, the recoil of this gun was also very terrifying. Fortunately, Sigmund's nun was of the enhancement type, so he could still suppress the gun. What's your name? Sigmund stood in front of the buck-toothed man. Oh no, it ry, oh no, hey. The buck-toothed man's murmur stopped, and his consciousness finally disappeared. Oh no, Hihachir would never rise again. Looking at the dispersing nun, Sigmund squatted down and closed the buck-toothed man's eyes with his hand. He felt the effort and sweat that the opponent had put in with that last strike. But, unfortunately, he was helping a tyrant and became Schelling's lackey. At the same time, with a bang, the elevator cable was cut by Silva. In the monitoring room, John said into the walkie-talkie, "Number 1 is confirmed dead. The elevator cable has been cut, execute Plan B." Silva finished reporting into the walkie-talkie and turned to walk towards Schelling's office. John walked out of the 5th floor monitoring room. Coming towards him was Bloodhound, his partner. "How is it? That Zaldik guy is preparing to come down from upstairs. TCH, by the time he comes down, the masked assassin will have already been killed by the 2 of us. Don't be too careless, number 1 has already been taken care of," John reminded with a sidelong glance. Perhaps fearing that the others would all demand one-on-one fights, they were afraid that John was too young and lacked combat experience, so they asked Bloodhound to take care of him. Bloodhound saw that John's silver chariot was very strong in combat, so he agreed to team up with John. John also needed an alibi at a critical moment. John glanced at Bloodhound again, and as expected, he didn't look very smart. John breathed a sigh of relief. Sigmund found that he couldn't use the elevator, so he could only take the stairs. In the stairwell. Go. 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 To be continued. Chapter 66. Sigmund switched to his third apostle, Hell's Eye mode, granting him X-ray vision. However, he couldn't differentiate between those using Zetsu and inanimate objects. Fortunately, Schelling couldn't use Nun, so Hell's Eye was still sufficient to find him. To evade Hell's Eye's detection, one had to use Zetsu, using Nun would only provide a limited degree of concealment. Clusters of blue light appeared before Sigmund's eyes. There were numerous traces of Nan energy on the third floor, indicating a powerful Nan user was present. Sigmund quickened his pace, finally standing before a door on the third floor. He mentally marked the location of the Nan energy cluster. His mask shifted again, and he materialized the revolver in his hand once more. Yes, it was the fifth apostle, Western gunslinger. He fired several shots through the wall towards the remembered location. The bullets forcefully penetrated the wall with a series of bangs, indicating they had hit their target. Sigmund kicked the door open and charged inside. Police! Show me your hands! No one responded. A figure clad in steel armor stood 5 meters away in the hallway. 2 bullets had struck its chest, leaving a bowl-sized dent in the armor. No, not just a dent, Sigmund's bullets had created a straight line. Through the hole, Sigmund clearly saw that the back of the armor was also pierced. Although it wasn't the left chest where the heart was, what was strange was that not a single drop of blood flowed from the wounds. The empty gap inspired fear. Even so, a layer of Nan clung to the armor. Could the armor contain a corpse? How else could there be no blood? The armored figure did nothing but turn and slowly walk down the hallway. Sigmund couldn't help but swallow hard. The moment the armored figure turned, Sigmund saw clearly that the armor was empty, devoid of any mechanical components. This meant it wasn't a robot, but a creation of a manipulation-type Nan user. Sigmund let out a heavy breath and shook his head, following behind. I thought so. The hallway echoed with the metallic clang of the empty armor as it stepped on the floor. Sigmund wore shoes that reduced noise and increased grip for assassination purposes, so only the clatter of the armor and its echoes filled the corridor. The uniform distance and rhythm of the armored figure's steps made it all the more unsettling. However, Sigmund was a seasoned veteran and wasn't particularly afraid now that he understood the principle behind it. Finally, they reached a door leading to the main hall. The armor stopped, seemingly about to push the door open, and slowly raised its hand. But then, the iron armor abandoned its usual slow pace, and its hand flashed out, grabbing a sword hanging at its waist. It immediately turned and charged towards Sigmund, seemingly aiming for a quick draw strike. However, Sigmund hadn't let his guard down and fired at the empty armor. The armor staggered back a few steps from the impact of the bullets. Sigmund seized the opportunity to fire another shot at the armor's hand. The fingers exploded from the bullet's impact, and the sword fell to the ground. Sigmund took advantage of this opening and kicked the empty armor away. The flying armor crashed through the door, revealing the scene in the main hall. If John were present, he might have said "Holy crap!" even louder. The hall was very spacious, likely used for hosting company galas during festivals, but the chairs had been cleared away. 2 robot-like figures resembling Gundams stood on the stage. One was about 2.5 meters tall, and the other was slightly taller, around 3 meters. The hyper-fantasy style left Sigmund bewildered. The lithe, slender bodies were covered in thick guns and cannons. The silver-white mechanical bodies exuded a violent aesthetic. He had just suspected high-tech robots, and now 2 robots with a full science fiction vibe had actually appeared. There were also 2 sets of armor identical to the one Sigmund had just knocked away. However, Sigmund wasn't flustered because of the earlier experience with the empty armor. Perhaps these 2 robots were just flashy but useless, like silver spears with wax heads. Maybe these 2 robots were also hollow, Sigmund thought maliciously. A strange light suddenly appeared in the eyes of the pseudo-Gundams. He had thought the eyes were just decorations, but they actually lit up. Sigmund began to suspect again if they were high-tech products, as even the lights in their eyes were lit. Maybe they were actually Cybertronians lured by shelling. But what he didn't know was that in the storage room below the stage, a person was hiding. She was also one of the bodyguards Shelling had hired, and she was quite attractive, although her skin was a bit dark. But most importantly, she possessed a magical weapon that gathered people's hearts, her breasts. Their volume was quite substantial, inspiring many fantasies. She was afraid of being groped by her teammates in the chaos, so she didn't want to team up with anyone. Her ability was to control objects made of metal, such as the armor and Gundams she was manipulating. However, with her strength, she could only control 5 machines, and she couldn't control them if the distance exceeded 100 meters from her body. The robots she controlled had some autonomy, they could act as long as simple instructions were given. She was lying in the narrow storage room, and perhaps because of the 2 large evil objects in front, she felt uncomfortable and changed her posture, turning on the remote control. LED lights lit up in the eyes of the Gundams. Anyone who didn't know would really think they were high-end intelligent battle robots. For example, Sigmund was bluffed. Watching Sigmund's surprised look at the lit-up Gundams on the computer screen showing the main hall's surveillance camera, she happily nodded in satisfaction with Sigmund's performance. Kavina was born into a middle-class family. She was different from other girls since she was young. Instead of dressing up pretty Barbie dolls, she preferred the toy cars and toy guns that boys liked. The first time Kavina came into contact with fighting robots at the age of 12, she fell deeply in love with them. But because robots were quite expensive, she couldn't afford them. However, she didn't like robots with high combat performance, she liked their cool appearance. By chance, Kavina became an user. She called her ability Mechanical Life, and she could share the vision of the mechanical life forms she controlled and issue commands to arrange formations. Kavina had a mischievous hobby, watching others being kept in the dark. On the other side, Sigmund was in a major crisis. The medieval-style armor that had been beaten into a mess by Sigmund stood up again. The Gundams on the stage and the other identical hollow armors also jumped down from the stage, preparing to surround Sigmund. Sigmund fired frantically, but these two Gundams were indeed completely different from those cheap, gaudy knockoffs that looked like they were bought on Dobeo. The bullets, comparable to shotgun shells, could only leave small dents on the surface and couldn't penetrate. The larger Gundam suddenly stopped, raised its arm, and the Gatling gun-like weapon strapped to its hand began to fire. Sigmund barely dodged the first burst of fire by rolling away. The gunfire stopped, not because there were no bullets, but because the other Gundam had already approached Sigmund. Shit. Sigmund, who was usually refined, gentle, and highly cultured, couldn't help but curse. At the same time, John and Paz, who were waiting above, also heard the ear-piercing gunshots. "It's time to go," Paz turned to John and said pretentiously. John also gave a charming smile. Imagine Joseph Joestar when he came up with the tequila girl idea. John slowly got up from the sofa, picked up the watermelon from the glass table in front of him, and followed. Chapter 67. John and the sick dog walked very slowly. Kavina wouldn't be resolved so quickly. John was just there for support. The reason they weren't allowed before was to prevent them from revealing their position. With her ability, Kavina's combat power could rival that of an ordinary adult male, truly terrifying. Therefore, if Kavina dared to show her face, she would die on the spot. Even now, Kavina was careful to avoid being seen. Of course, walking so slowly was also for the sake of style. If they rushed down in a hurry, how could they show off? Looking at the sick dog's arrogant and uninhibited smile, John sighed. He had no idea how this weakling could smile so wildly with his pathetic strength. This teammate was really hard to handle. Only the green, heavy watermelon in his hand could give John some comfort. At the same time, the battle on the third floor was in full swing. Sigmund was surrounded. He pulled out two daggers strapped to his lower leg, and the daggers met the incoming attack with a clang of metal. Such strong power! The pseudo Gundam had a height advantage, delivering a heavy blow. The daggers collided with the Gundam's greatsword, sending sparks flying. The Gundam's destructive greatsword even chipped Sigmund's infused daggers. Sigmund was suppressed, forced to rely on his superb short sword skills to slightly deflect the greatsword's force elsewhere. Due to inertia, the pseudo Gundam's greatsword slammed into the ground. Sigmund seized the opportunity to swing his knives wildly. Only the light of the blades and after-images could be seen, along with the clashing of metal. In just 3 seconds, Sigmund had already struck the Gundam dozens of times. Sigmund immediately jumped back, creating distance, because there were other medieval-style armored figures surrounding him besides the pseudo Gundam. Whether it was a gun or a knife, although they could damage those medieval-style steel armors, they would stand up again no matter how much damage they took. The metal used for the Gundam's exterior was completely different, an unknown alloy with terrifying hardness. Sigmund pressed down on his trembling hand. Could it be that he had to use the first apostle? No, the first apostle couldn't be used now, in case there were other stronger people later. Moreover, this robot's defense was very strong, and Sigmund's current strength couldn't break through it at all. Sigmund shook his head, shaking off the unrealistic thoughts in his mind. Gunfire came again. Sure enough, they wouldn't let him relax for a moment. Another Gundam immediately activated remote support mode, its machine gun firing wildly. Sigmund once again performed a lazy roll, barely dodging the machine gun's barrage, with the rest blocked by flow. Then, there was only one choice left. Second Apostle, Kiss of the Reaper. Sigmund transformed again, his jacket turning into a pure black robe. Some yellowish bandages engraved with strange black runes wrapped around Sigmund's exposed hands and feet, and the mask on his face also turned into a white, twisted human face. Different from the terror of the third apostle, the appearance of the second apostle on the mask was even more despairing, making people shudder. Sigmund's nun gathered in his hand, and scarlet and pure black nun mixed together, surging from Sigmund's left arm and enveloping his palm. Ominous, despair, death, curse. The sick dog turned his head in despair and waved his hand, cursing John for being unprofessional. Damn it, you're still eating watermelon at this time. The sick dog said angrily. Because he had been in Zetsu all this time, wasn't it just so he could spy on the battle unnoticed? The sound of the watermelon bursting exposed them all. Because of John's malicious onlookers, the battle situation changed a lot. The moment the watermelon was split open by John, it affected everyone present. First of all, it was already difficult for the sick dog to sneak attack Sigmund, because he knew in advance that someone would definitely be on guard. Kavina also glanced over to see which idiot it was. Sigmund was frightened by the sound from behind. He was already very close to the Gundam in front of him. If he turned around to defend against the enemy, he would definitely be killed by the Gundam. He simply went all out, ignoring the enemy behind him and killing the immediate threat first. With this mentality, Sigmund rushed up and pressed one hand on the Gundam. Then, in everyone's horrified gaze, the nun layer covering the invincible Gundam collapsed layer by layer, or rather, the nun was rapidly decaying. More accurately, the nun was slowly falling into death like it was sick and aging. Sure enough, these were not technological creations, but puppets controlled by manipulation-type nun abilities. After losing nun, they seemed to lose their souls and fell stiffly to the ground. Sigmund used the same method to slap two medieval-style armors to death. This move stunned everyone, especially John, who had just arrived. How could he slap a Gundam to death with one palm? John felt that something was wrong. Even more terrified was Kavina. She knew very well that the Gundam controlled by her nun ability was ordered with a lot of money, and its defense was difficult to penetrate even with ordinary armor-piercing bullets. With the addition of nun defense, it was basically invincible. She originally thought that as long as the main body was not exposed, she would be fine, but she didn't expect that the opponent's ability was a natural counter to her. Sigmund immediately reached out his black hand towards another Gundam. Kavina naturally didn't want to, but this Gundam was different from the previous one, it was better at long-range support. However, Sigmund, who used Ren, could not be killed by machine guns alone. Suddenly, the iron plate in the Gundam's crotch opened. John was shocked. Could it be the legendary Armstrong-style Armstrong Cyclone Cannon? A cannon barrel suddenly extended from the Gundam's crotch. Sure enough, John patted his forehead. Fire! Ammunition immediately poured out of the barrel, and the shells shot towards Sigmund, shaking the 3-meter-long Gundam back. Sigmund could only dodge frantically. In just 40 seconds, he didn't know how many shells were fired, and the field was plowed by the shells, becoming dilapidated. The sound of the cannons gradually stopped, it seemed that the shells were used up. The sick dog stared blankly with his mouth open, watching the Gundam shoot and muttering in his mouth, so fast. John nodded, it seems to be premature ejaculation. Chapter 68. Watching Sigmund swiftly dispatch the two seemingly high-tech Gundams, everyone present was astonished. All that remained on the field were two useless suits of armor with no technical sophistication, made of ordinary steel that could be easily destroyed. One empty suit of armor, at full power, fled towards the doorway where John and Rabid Dog were, creating a huge commotion. The other, silently, approached Kavina's real body. This is bad. Rabid Dog wanted to turn and run. Sigmund's move just now had really frightened him. The inexplicable disappearance of the nun, and Sigmund's bizarre attack methods, startled Rabid Dog. Sigmund smiled wickedly and began chasing the empty armor running towards the doorway, ignoring the other one. But after only taking 2 steps, Sigmund suddenly stopped. Aren't you too impatient? Why did you only recall 1 suit of armor? Damn it, this is troublesome. Kavina looked panicked, fidgeting in the storage room under the stage, her teeth chattering, her small hands clenched white. Sigmund immediately turned to look at the empty armor approaching Kavina. The armor had stopped moving, but that was too unnatural. Let me guess, controlling such a powerful puppet, the controller shouldn't be too far away. So, where could you be? Sigmund approached the pure black stage step by step, because without any activity, the screens behind were all black. Behind the stage were 2 dressing rooms, but Sigmund didn't even glance at them. These 2 rooms were quite small and obvious, not good places to hide. Sigmund easily defeated the other empty armor approaching the stage. Then, could there be someone in the space below the stage? Sigmund said as he transformed his mask into Hell's Eye mode. Kavina was frightened by Sigmund's words, her heart leaping into her throat. She couldn't maintain Zetsu, and then unconsciously erupted from her body. Kavina's Nen, under the power of Hell's Eye, was as conspicuous as a street lamp at night. Sigmund revealed a knowing smile. With a poof sound, it came from beside John. Just now, because of Sigmund's powerful actions, John and Rabid Dog had focused all their attention on Sigmund, guessing his abilities, and hadn't paid attention to their surroundings. The sudden sound really startled John and Rabid Dog. Indeed, it was Silva hurrying down from upstairs. As a mature and experienced assassin, silent step was a fundamental skill. But even this veteran driver almost crashed today. John saw Silva do a somersault in mid-air, like a world-class gymnast, rotating in the air with his hands clasped around his knees, then landing gracefully on the open space behind John. Rabid Dog stared blankly at the stairwell, and John also looked over. It was a watermelon rind. Clearly, it was the one John had eaten, and under Rabid Dog's garbage-like gaze, John guiltily turned his head. Who is so lacking in virtue, littering watermelon rinds? John angrily looked around, righteously condemning this behavior. However, through Rabid Dog's gaze, Silva knew who the culprit was. Bang, 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 gunshots rang out, and everyone cursed inwardly, knowing things were bad. John and the others all used Ken. The door panel shattered, and several bullets had successfully penetrated it. Fortunately, they each had some skill, and there were no combat casualties. John, because of the dual protection of his wire-like body, and Ken, was the least injured of all. Then there was Silva, relying on an reserve several times greater than John's. The bullets only grazed a bit of skin on his arm, drawing a little blood. Rabid Dog, at a glance, showed that he usually indulged too much, neglecting his Nen training, and several bloody holes had been opened in his body. The only fortunate thing was that no vital points were hit, and Rabid Dog had not lost his fighting ability. In fact, the bullets had still achieved no small feat. Kavina, hiding in the stage storage room, had been shot in the abdomen, bleeding non-stop, and was no longer able to fight. Based on his previous performance, Rabid Dog confirmed that Sigmund's speed was not faster than his, but he had to guard against his bizarre abilities. Stimulated by anger, Rabid Dog charged in first. John and Silva were not impatient, but also slowly walked in. Mainly because they hadn't fully figured out Sigmund's abilities, so Silva was happy to have a fool help him test things out, and also exhaust some of the opponent's strength. John also wanted to figure out Sigmund's abilities, because the information clearly stated that he was an enhancer. After seeing the bizarre abilities just now, John only wanted to shove the person who wrote the information into a latrine. What kind of intelligence was that? Not a single thing was right. Sigmund was definitely not a simple enhancer. Looking at Sigmund's fierce appearance, John felt that as long as he slacked off a bit, and interfered with Silva, he could easily complete the mission. John glanced at Silva with ill intentions, but he didn't react at all, just raised an eyebrow, without saying a word. Sigmund looked at the 3 people who suddenly appeared very calmly. Sigmund's marksmanship wasn't good, only at an amateur level. If it weren't for the gun's power and speed being strong enough, he would have been killed long ago. Letting someone shoot required very large movements, and it was entirely possible to predict the trajectory of the bullets in advance through Sigmund's movements. Rabid Dog was precisely using this method, and didn't get hit by a single bullet. Constantly moving, charging, Rabid Dog was already very close to Sigmund. Suddenly, Sigmund's mask once again transformed into the appearance of the destruction mech just now. Second Apostle, Kiss of Death. A stream of red-black evil Nen surged from Sigmund's hand. He didn't look like a masked hero, but rather like a bloodthirsty demon. After sensing this Nen, Rabid Dog no longer approached, but instead jumped back a distance, watching Sigmund warily. Silva, looking at the Nen on Sigmund's hand, revealed a troubled and apprehensive expression. Sigmund suddenly twisted his body, his elbow slamming into Rabid Dog's nose. With a smack sound, Rabid Dog flew out, his nose already collapsed, and a front tooth knocked out, blood splattering everywhere. Sigmund used his strength to prove that he was indeed an enhancer. Rabid Dog, because of the violent attack, suffered a fractured facial bone and a moderate concussion, temporarily losing his fighting ability. Sigmund looked at Silva and John, who were still standing on the field. John glanced at Silva, signaling him to go ahead. Silva ignored him. To be continued. Chapter 69. Watching Sigmund resolve the two seemingly high-tech Gundams with swift efficiency, everyone present was astonished by this feat. All that remained on the field were two useless suits of armor with no technical sophistication, made of ordinary steel that could easily be destroyed. One empty suit of armor sped towards the entrance where John and Mad Dog were, making a great show of force. The other quietly approached Kavana's real body. This is bad. Mad Dog wanted to turn and run. Sigmund's earlier move had genuinely frightened him. The inexplicable disappearance of his Nen and Sigmund's bizarre attack methods had startled Mad Dog. Sigmund smiled wickedly and began chasing the empty suit of armor running towards the entrance, ignoring the other. But after only taking 2 steps, Sigmund suddenly stopped. Aren't you being too hasty? Why did you only recall 1 suit of armor? Damn it, this is troublesome. Kavana looked panicked, fidgeting restlessly in the backstage storage room, her teeth chattering and her small hands clenched white. Sigmund immediately turned to look at the empty suit of armor approaching Kavana. The armor had stopped moving, but this was too unnatural. Let me guess, to control such powerful puppets, the controller shouldn't be too far away. So where could you be? Sigmund approached the pure black stage step by step. Because there was no activity, the screens behind were all black. There were 2 dressing rooms behind the stage, but Sigmund didn't even glance at them. These 2 rooms were quite small and obvious, not good places to hide someone. Sigmund easily defeated the other empty suit of armor approaching the stage. So, could there be someone in the space beneath the platform? Sigmund said as he transformed his mask into Hell's Eye mode. Kavana was startled by Sigmund's words, her heart leaping into her throat. She couldn't maintain her Zetsu, and then unconsciously erupted from her body. Kavana's Nen, under the power of Hell's Eye, was as conspicuous as a street lamp at night. Sigmund revealed a knowing smile. With a soft thud, a sound came from beside John. Because of Sigmund's powerful performance, John and Mad Dog had focused all their attention on Sigmund, guessing his abilities, and hadn't noticed their surroundings. The sudden sound did startle John and Mad Dog. Indeed, it was Silva hurrying down from upstairs. As a mature and experienced assassin, silent step was a basic skill. But even this veteran driver almost crashed today. John only saw Silva flip in mid-air like a world-class gymnast, rotating with his knees tucked to his chest, then gracefully landing on the open ground behind John. Mad Dog stared blankly at the stairwell, and John also looked over. Yes, it was a melon rind. Clearly, it was the one John had left over, and under Mad Dog's garbage-like gaze, John guiltily turned his head. Who is so inconsiderate, littering watermelon rinds? John angrily looked around, righteously condemning this behavior. However, through Mad Dog's eyes, Silva knew who the culprit was. Bang, 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 gunshots rang out, and everyone cursed inwardly, knowing things were bad. John and the others all used Ken. The door panel shattered, and several bullets successfully penetrated it. Fortunately, they each had some skill, and there were no combat casualties. John, due to the double protection of his line body and Ken, was the least injured of all. Then there was Silva, whose aura was several times greater than John's, and the bullet only grazed a bit of skin on his arm, causing a little bleeding. Mad Dog could tell at a glance that he had been neglecting his Nen training due to excessive masturbation, and several bloody holes had been opened in his body. The only fortunate thing was that no vital organs were hit, and Mad Dog hadn't lost his ability to fight. In fact, the bullets had made a significant contribution. Kavana, hiding in the stage storage room, had been shot in the abdomen, bleeding profusely and unable to continue. Based on Mad Dog's previous performance, he confirmed that Sigmund's speed wasn't faster than his own, but he had to be wary of his strange abilities. Stimulated by anger, Mad Dog charged in first. John and Silva weren't impatient, but they also slowly walked in. Mainly because they hadn't fully figured out Sigmund's abilities, so Silva was happy to have an idiot help him test the waters and, incidentally, exhaust the opponent's stamina. John also wanted to figure out Sigmund's abilities, because the information clearly stated that he was an enhancer. After seeing the strange abilities just now, John just wanted to shove the person who wrote the information into a latrine. What kind of intelligence was that? None of it was right. Sigmund was definitely not just a simple enhancer. Seeing Sigmund's fierce appearance, John felt that as long as he slacked off and interfered with Silva, they could easily complete the mission. Mad Dog used this method to avoid every single bullet. Constantly moving and charging, Mad Dog had gotten very close to Sigmund. Suddenly, Sigmund's mask transformed again into the appearance of the destructive mecha from before. Second Apostle, Kiss of Death. A stream of red and black evilnin surged from Sigmund's hand. He didn't look like a masked hero but rather like a bloodthirsty demon. After feeling this nin, Mad Dog no longer approached but instead jumped back a distance, watching Sigmund warily. Silva, looking at the nin in Sigmund's hand, revealed a troubled and apprehensive expression. Mad Dog quickly circled around Sigmund, his figure gradually blurring in the high-speed movement. Sigmund stood upright with one foot raised, his hands sometimes clenched into claws and sometimes flattened, moving randomly without any pattern, his whole body twisting. It was as if he wasn't fighting but rather participating in a bonfire party of some African tribe. That's the Kakak dance. Silva recognized the name of the stance Sigmund was using. This is a long-circulated ancient martial art. It's a combat dance of a certain ethnic minority, with very high combat power, emphasizing all-around defense, reacting after the opponent moves, and counter-attacking. Warriors of this tribe once used this martial art to defeat armies several times their size. Silva saw John's confusion about these strange stances. This martial art evolved from sacrificial dances, so it's a bit strange, but many of these meaningless poses and movements can also be used to mislead the opponent. Mad Dog quickly approached from Sigmund's blind spot behind him. This was Mad Dog's style, rushing to the front to bite the enemy and spread the virus. How hateful, wanting others to get rabies too, simply insane. Sigmund suddenly twisted his body, his elbow striking Mad Dog's nose. With a crack, Mad Dog flew backwards, his nose collapsed, and a front tooth was knocked out, blood splattering everywhere. Sigmund used his strength to prove that he was indeed an enhancer. Mad Dog, due to the violent attack, suffered a fractured facial bone, a moderate concussion, and temporarily lost his combat ability. Sigmund looked at Silva and John, who were still standing on the field. John glanced at Silva, signaling him to go. Silva ignored him. To be continued. Chapter 70. As it turned out, John still didn't know what Sigmund's nin ability would do to a person. But it was clear that Sigmund was very restrained in using this move on people, so he only used his elbow to attack the rabid dog. John was still inclined to help Sigmund. It would be awkward if he were accidentally killed by a hero. When the strength of the enemy and ourselves is still unclear, it's time to show off some unique skills. That's right, it's the ultimate secret technique inherited from the gentleman with the golden spirit, Joseph Joestar the Runaway. As the saying goes, you can beat Ripple, but you can't beat Runaway. Its effect far exceeds Ripple. The reality is that sometimes running away is enough to make your opponent lose. John deeply understood this. John's debut battle was won in this way. As the saying goes, a wise man does not stand under a dangerous wall. John decided on a strategic retreat. That way, if Cheryl got killed, it wouldn't be my fault. It's not that our army isn't working hard, but the enemy is just too damn strong. I'll leave it to you, old man, John shouted and ran away. Silva wouldn't run. Although Silva Zaldik was happy to see someone wear down his opponent, he wouldn't avoid a fight either. Now, Silva's only thought was, this time, he might be losing money. Thinking this in his heart, his hands didn't stop throwing out nin bullets at tricky angles to block Sigmund's movement trajectory. Silva condensed nin bullets very quickly. John had only taken 2 steps when Silva had already condensed 5 nin bullets. After throwing out nin bullets to block Sigmund's path, Silva immediately rushed up. This was a calculated move. Silva's nin bullets were very fast, but because of the distance, they weren't impossible to dodge. However, if he dodged, it would be exactly what Silva wanted. Silva's blockade forced Sigmund into close quarters combat with Silva. Close quarters combat wasn't hand-to-hand combat. Sigmund couldn't dodge nin bullets at close range. Not only that, but Silva's speed was also faster than Sigmund's. He could run away even if he couldn't win. If Sigmund went against the routine and forcefully took the nin bullets, Silva could also take the opportunity to weaken Sigmund. John didn't run away when he saw this scene. Instead, he stopped to watch the two's battle. Both of them were very powerful non-users. This kind of life and death struggle was rare. Now, Silva's fighting style was very cunning. He was constantly wearing down Sigmund, not confronting him head-on. Silva's Nen quantity was terrifying. He was the person John had encountered with the most Nen so far. His combat experience was also among the top in the world. In countless battles and killings, Silva had developed a strong intuition for the battle situation. Based on his intuition, Silva felt that Sigmund hadn't fully displayed his full strength. Silva also felt that the attitude of that kid named John was strange. It was obvious that he hated the employer Cheryl and had a somewhat ambiguous attitude towards Sigmund. Silva didn't trust John. His intuition told him that John was very likely to stab him in the back at a critical moment. Silva was wary of Sigmund's abilities and had to guard against John's sneak attacks, so he didn't dare to use his full strength to deal with Sigmund. But John really couldn't intervene in their battle. There was almost no gap. John wasn't confident in killing Silva. If Silva wanted to escape, John couldn't stop him. Taking action would implicate many people. So, observing was the best option right now. After fighting with Silva for half a minute, Sigmund cancelled his transformation. The mask turned back into a grey and white mask without any patterns. Dodging, flow defense. Seeing that Sigmund didn't use the second apostle, kiss of death, he also boldly approached for close combat. Once the patterns on Sigmund's mask showed any abnormality, he would immediately distance himself, being cautious and not giving the opponent any chance. Sigmund was also very irritable, constantly being kited by this white-haired, purple-clothed man. This damn white hair was extremely cautious and ruthless, specializing in attacking vital points and not avoiding the lower 3 points. The white hair had a lot of combat experience and good stamina. He could actually fight a close-quarters battle with the enhancement-type non-user like himself without showing any weakness. From left to right, from front to back, from the ground to the ceiling, every part of the room became the battlefield for Sigmund and Silva. Gravel and shattered glass splashed everywhere. Although Silva and Sigmund were fighting, they both kept some of their attention on John. Sigmund didn't know what abilities John had and didn't dare to attack with Silva pressing him. Silva had seen the terrifying speed of Silver Chariot and was also wary of John. Unknowingly, a stable situation had formed on the battlefield, but John was undoubtedly a force that could change the battle situation. John slowly approached the rabid dog, looking at the comrade who had partnered with him for a few hours. He could no longer see his original gloomy face. Now, he could only see a face twisted and deformed by brute force. He weakly opened his mouth, as if complaining about the unfairness of life. John glanced at him gloatingly, his facial expression fluctuating. It must be said that the rabid dog was very funny now, with his mouth wide open, one of his front teeth had fallen out, and his nose was spitting blood bubbles like a goldfish. One eye could only see a slit because his cheek was so swollen, and the other eye stared blankly at the ceiling. Thinking about the rabid dog's previous pretentiousness, John took great effort to hold back his laughter and quickly walked away. John walked towards the stage's storage room. The entrance to the storage room was behind the stage, and the entrance was very low. You had to bend over to get in. The girl was sitting against the wall, the pistol in her left hand drooping weakly. Several layers of gauze were wrapped around her abdomen, but the bleeding didn't stop. It was obvious that the bullet should have entered her abdomen. A pool of blood had already formed under Kavina. Although Kavina's injuries were very serious, John was inexplicably attracted by Kavina's large eagle on her chest. John nodded, indeed a large eagle, no matter how many times he looked. "Little brother, where are you looking? Hurry up and leave, don't attract the masked men over. This sister has no fighting power anymore." Kavina looked at John with a displeased expression. "We've been fighting for 5 minutes, right? Everyone who should be here is here now, which means this should be the main force that Cheryl recruited this time." Silva raised his eyebrows, wondering what Sigmund was going to say. Sigmund continued, "Cheryl has at most 1 or 2 people left by his side, and they shouldn't be particularly strong in combat because it's difficult for him to buy so many powerful bodyguards with his wealth and channels. That means as long as you guys are dealt with, the mission will be more than half completed." Silva didn't know what Sigmund was going to do, and he felt very uneasy for no reason. The mask on Sigmund's face didn't appear, but it seemed to have changed its material, filled with metallic luster, with gold and silver interweaving. A suit of armor composed of gold and silver colors enveloped his entire body. John and Kavina, separated by a wall, both felt Sigmund's terrifying aura. Sigmund's whole body glowed with a golden light like the sun. First Apostle, Champion of Justice. Chapter 71. As it turned out, John still didn't know what Sigmund's Nin ability would do to a person. But it was clear that Sigmund was very restrained in using this move on people, so he only used his elbow to attack the rabid dog. John was still inclined to help Sigmund. It would be awkward if he were accidentally killed by a hero. When the strength of the enemy and ourselves was still unclear, it was time to show off some unique skills. That's right, it was the ultimate secret technique inherited from the gentleman with the golden spirit, Joseph Joestar, the secret Joestar family technique, run away. As the saying goes, you can beat Ripple, but you can't beat running away. Its effect far exceeds Ripple. The reality is that sometimes, just by running, your opponent loses. John understood this deeply. John's debut battle was won this way. As the saying goes, a wise man does not stand under a dangerous wall. John decided on a strategic retreat. That way, if Cheryl got killed, it wouldn't be his fault. It wasn't that our army didn't try hard enough, but the enemy was just too damn strong. I'll leave it to you, old man, John shouted and ran away. Silva wouldn't run. Although Silva Zaldik was happy to see someone exhaust his opponent, he wouldn't avoid a fight if he encountered one. Now, Silva's only thought was that this wave might be a loss. Thinking this in his heart, his hands didn't stop throwing Nin bullets at tricky angles, sealing off Sigmund's movement trajectory. Silva's speed in condensing Nin bullets was extremely fast. John had only taken 2 steps when Silva had condensed 5 Nin bullets. After throwing the Nin bullets to block Sigmund's path, Silva immediately rushed forward. This was a calculated move. Silva's Nin bullets were very fast, but because of the distance, they weren't impossible to dodge. However, if he dodged, it would be exactly what Silva wanted. Silva's blockade forced Sigmund into close-range combat with Silva. Close-range combat wasn't hand-to-hand combat. Sigmund couldn't dodge Nin bullets at close range. Not only that, but Silva's speed was also faster than Sigmund's, so he could run away even if he couldn't win. If Sigmund went against the grain and took the Nin bullets head-on, Silva could also take the opportunity to weaken Sigmund. John, seeing this scene, didn't run away but instead stopped to watch the battle between the two. But John really couldn't intervene in their battle. There was almost no gap. John didn't have the confidence to kill Silva. If Silva wanted to escape, John couldn't stop him. If he took action, it would implicate many people. So now, watching was the best option. Sigmund cancelled his transformation after fighting Silva for half a minute. The mask returned to being a grey and white mask without any patterns. Dodging, flow defense. Seeing that Sigmund didn't use the second apostle, Death's Kiss, he boldly approached for close combat. Once the patterns on Sigmund's mask showed any abnormalities, he would immediately distance himself, cautiously not giving the opponent any chance. Sigmund was also very annoyed, constantly being kited by this white-haired, purple-clothed man. This pale-skinned guy was extremely cautious, and his attacks were vicious, specializing in vital points, without any hesitation for the lower body. The white-haired man had a wealth of combat experience and good stamina, and he could actually fight such an enhancement-type Nin user in close combat without showing any weakness. From left to right, from front to back, from the ground to the ceiling, every part of the room had become Sigmund and Silva's battlefield. Gravel and broken glass shards splashed everywhere. Although Silva and Sigmund were fighting, they both kept some attention on John. Sigmund didn't know what abilities John had, and with Silva holding the line, he didn't dare to attack. Silva had seen the terrifying speed of Silver Chariot and was also wary of John. Unconsciously, a stable situation had formed on the battlefield, but John was undoubtedly a force that could change the battle. John slowly approached the rabid dog, looking at his comrade who had partnered with him for a few hours. He could no longer see his original gloomy face. Now, he could only see a face twisted and deformed by great force. He weakly opened his mouth, as if telling the injustice of life. John looked at him with schadenfreude, and his facial expression fluctuated. It must be said that the rabid dog was very funny now. His mouth was wide open, and a front tooth was missing. His nose was spitting blood bubbles like a goldfish. One eye could only see a slit because his cheek was swollen, and the other eye was staring blankly at the ceiling. Thinking of the rabid dog's pretense before, John took great effort to hold back his laughter and quickly walked away. John walked towards the stage's storage room. The entrance to the storage room was behind the stage, and the entrance was very low, requiring him to bend over to enter. The girl was sitting against the wall, her left hand holding a pistol weakly drooping. Several laps of gauze were wrapped around her abdomen, but blood was still flowing non-stop. It could be seen that the bullet should have entered her abdomen, and a pool of blood had formed under Kavina. Although Kavina's injury was very serious, John was inexplicably attracted to Kavina's chest, his gaze completely drawn to her big evil. John nodded. It was indeed a big evil. No matter how many times he looked. Little brother, where are you looking? Hurry up and leave, don't attract the masked man. This sister has no fighting power anymore. Kavina looked at John with a displeased expression. So young, why do you keep looking there? John shyly lowered his head. This must be because John was single for too long in his previous life. John blamed everything on his previous life. Calming down, he realized that Kavina's wound was not bandaged well, the technique looked amateurish, and blood was still flowing continuously. John used stone freeze threads to take the bullet out of the wound. What they didn't know was that the battle on the field had taken another turn. Sigmund ran and jumped, distancing himself from Silva. We've been fighting for 5 minutes, right? Now, everyone who should come here has come. That is to say, this should be the main force Cheryl recruited this time. Silva raised his eyebrows, wondering what Sigmund was going to say. Sigmund continued, Cheryl has at most 1 or 2 people left by his side, and they shouldn't be particularly strong fighters because it's difficult for him to buy so many powerful bodyguards with his wealth and channels. That is to say, as long as you are dealt with, most of the mission will be completed. Silva didn't know what Sigmund was going to do and felt very uneasy for no reason. The mask on Sigmund's face didn't appear, but instead seemed to have changed its material, full of metallic luster with gold and silver shining together. A suit of armor composed of gold and silver enveloped his entire body. John and Kavina, separated by a wall, felt Sigmund's terrifying aura. The terrifying aura was still rising steadily, and Silva had already jumped far away. Sigmund's whole body glowed with a golden light like the sun. First Apostle, Champion of Justice. Chapter 72. John's hair stood on end, and his whole body shivered. Kavina's face was also very pale. Sigmund's nun disappeared, replaced by a vast, irresistible aura. This aura was completely different from the previous second apostle's dark sense of fear. This nun was bright, upright, and honorable. However, as his opponent, Sheba felt very uncomfortable. Sheba's nun was at least 2 to 3 times that of Sigmund's, but now Sigmund's nun far surpassed Sheba's several times over. Why do you think I'm called the Masked Knight, and why am I called a enhancement type nun user? Sheba recalled the information he had seen before. Sigmund was identified as an enhancement type nun user because he had once punched through a 2-meter thick concrete wall. However, in the previous battle, Sigmund's strength was obviously not that great, and Sheba almost overlooked this point. The golden light gradually dissipated, and Sigmund, wearing golden armor, stood more than 10 meters away from Sheba. No nun user in the world dared to ignore this power. Even if Chairman Netero himself came, he would have to go all out to win. Sheba was strong, but he was far behind the chairman, even the Sheba of later years would be unable to reach that level. Sheba immediately distanced himself. The task he received was to kill Sigmund, but that didn't mean Sheba had to sacrifice his own life. If he really couldn't win, he could ask the ancestor for help for the sake of the family's reputation, and he didn't need to throw his life away. However, nun abilities also have to abide by basic laws. This kind of ability must have harsh conditions or great side effects, which means that this ability should not be able to last. Sigmund's figure suddenly disappeared, and Sheba's pupil shrank. So fast! Sheba raised his elbow to block. It was completely different from before. The speed had at least doubled, even faster than Sheba's full speed. Sheba no longer had time to think and could only passively parry, being forced to retreat by Sigmund's attacks. Sigmund's first apostle enhancement was in almost every aspect. This was not as simple as 1+1, Sigmund's combat power had increased several times. If Sheba's force deflecting skills weren't good enough, he would have already died here, but Sheba's arm was still dislocated. The terrifying force struck Sheba's body, and Sheba could only move in the direction of the force in advance to reduce the damage. Sigmund relentlessly pursued, not giving Sheba a moment to relax. Sheba kept running away. In Sigmund's tight attacks, he noticed that Sigmund's attacks were very fast, wanting to defeat the enemy with one move, lacking the steadiness he had before. Sigmund's attack methods showed that Sigmund was very eager to end the battle quickly, which means that this ability either had a time limit or put a lot of pressure on the body. Sheba guessed correctly. First Apostle Righteous Envoy is the most powerful of all abilities, but it can only be used for a maximum of 3 minutes per day, and it takes a full 24 hours to cool down after use. After using this mode, he will fall into a state of weakness for 2 hours, and once he uses this ability, he cannot use other abilities during these 3 minutes of transformation. So this ability is an all-out effort. Once you can't defeat the opponent, you're doomed. That's why Sigmund was so anxious to cripple Sheba. At this time, John couldn't care about treating Kavina. Staying here with Kavina would only harm her. John went out alone and saw the transformed Sigmund chasing and beating Sheba violently. John swallowed a mouthful of saliva. It was too brutal. John was preparing to slowly escape using Zetsu. A peach-colored human face appeared on John's forehead, but John was wearing a large hood, so no one should be able to see it. Whether it was Sheba or Sigmund who attacked John, John wouldn't die, but he would still be greatly injured. Sure enough, Sheba saw John appear and immediately led Sigmund over. Damn it, Sheba, you with your thick eyebrows and big eyes, you really aren't a good person, trying to shift the blame to me. John took out the Thompson submachine gun tied around his waist. Bastard, eat my Thompson-style ripple breathing. John couldn't aim the gun at Sheba. Their figures were changing too fast, and their movement speed was too fast for John, an amateur shooter, to aim accurately. But what does it matter? The Thompson isn't a sniper rifle anyway, and besides, with sexy pistols, even a retarded baboon can become a marksman. Bullets poured out, covering the area where Sheba and Sigmund were. Sigmund and Sheba, who were fighting in a group, tacitly jumped back, but John didn't dare to use sexy pistols on Sheba. Once he used it, he would definitely be discovered, and he might even be caught with a few substitutes. Sheba rushed directly towards John, and Sigmund chased after him. Next, I'm counting on you. WDNMD, don't come over here. John and Sheba hadn't said a word to each other before, and their current behavior was undoubtedly tearing up the facade to screw over their teammates. Sigmund seemed to have recognized John and rushed towards John, while Sheba took the opportunity to gradually distance himself to the side. John's whole body turned into threads, summoning Stone Free to defend against the enemy. Silver Chariot had enough speed, but its destructive power was a weakness. Even the sword might be broken. Stone Free's impact resistance was also good, with power and speed both at A. Stone Free was John's strongest stand besides King Crimson. According to John's judgment, Sigmund's current strength should be similar to that of his non-teacher, Wilhelm. Sigmund made a mistake in approaching John. Wilhelm had never used his full strength against John. But Sigmund would use his full strength, and Sigmund's power had already surpassed Wilhelm. Stone Free stood in front of John, and John himself also stood diagonally behind Stone Free with his fist clenched. When Sigmund approached, Stone Free launched a preemptive strike. Stone Free's punching speed was indeed much faster than Sigmund's. It shouldn't be said that there were only a few freaks in this world who could keep up with a level speed, but Sigmund wasn't one of them. Stone Free's fist hit Sigmund's face first. It was so hard, that's what Sigmund felt first. Warm reminder, the website is about to be revised, which may cause the loss of reading progress. Please save bookshelf and reading records in time, it is recommended to save screenshots. We apologize for the inconvenience. Chapter 73. Sieba, this is my last ripple. After John finished speaking, his eyes rolled back, and he fell from the 5th floor. Sigmund also heard the roar outside, and he seemed to realize something. He also jumped out of the window, holding the window frame with one hand and sticking his head out. In fact, John, who had fallen to the ground, was also curiously looking at the top floor of the building. Sure enough, it was not an illusion. The roar just now was indeed the sound of a helicopter, and there should be one taking off or landing on the helipad on the top floor. In other words, it was that old bastard Shillen's contingency plan. As a successful businessman, Shillen would naturally not put all his eggs in one basket. Similarly, he did not dare to place all his hopes on the bodyguards he hired, including John, even with the reputation of the Zaldik family. From the moment the first bodyguard was taken out, Shillen was even more convinced. He didn't dare to call the helicopter in advance, because that would be too obvious and he would be targeted. So, he contacted the helicopter early on, waiting until Sigmund was indeed held back before running away. This way, even if all the hired bodyguards died, it wouldn't matter. Just now, the soundproof glass broke. Silva didn't dare to attack, and John was still pretending to be dead. Sigmund understood the meaning of the sound almost instantly. Sigmund relied on the grip of his fingers and toes, latching onto the glass of each window, constantly jumping upwards. Because of his powerful jumping ability, each jump could reach at least 3 floors. At this time, 1 minute and 20 seconds had passed since Sigmund's transformation, of which only 15 seconds were spent fighting John. In other words, there was still 1 minute and 20 seconds left in this state. Sigmund had to deal with Shilin in this time and then escape from Silva and John. Silva rotated the muscles on his arm, and his dislocated arm was restored. After a simple treatment of the arm injury, Silva threw Tunan bullets at Sigmund as a distraction. But of course, they had no effect. John, whose arm was also broken, did not have this special skill to control muscles. However, John was also a mature transmigrator with a cheat. John adjusted his breathing, and streams of golden current flowed into his arm. The broken bones and damaged tendons gradually recovered under the nourishment of the ripple energy. It would take another 10 seconds for his arm to recover. John got up from the ground. Silva didn't chase after him. The Tunan bullets just now were also very perfunctory. It could be seen that Silva didn't dare to provoke Sigmund either, just preventing him from going up at the fastest speed. In fact, if Sigmund killed Shilin, the employer, then he would have no reason to fight Sigmund, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Leave him behind at all costs so I can leave. The boss, Shilin's, panicked and furious command suddenly rang in his ears. It came from the earphones, used for mutual communication, but John and the other bodyguards were all lone wolves, fighting their own battles and not communicating much. John almost forgot about this. Of course, John didn't want to pay attention to him. Sigmund's combat power was off the charts right now. John going up would definitely be suicide. But Silva actually rushed up. John also stopped pretending to be dead, got up, and ejected the wired arm, then used ripple dash to stick to the wall. John pulled the wire on his arm and contracted it, completely able to cosplay Spider-Man. Today, John could finally use the special skills of Hermit Purple and Hierophant Green. Relying on this special skill, John was much faster at going upstairs than Sigmund and Silva. But Sigmund had just jumped to the top floor, and the helicopter Shilin was riding in had already taken off. "Goodbye, idiot!" The speaker on the rooftop platform sounded, connected to the microphone on the helicopter. It was Shilin's voice. "We are now more than 170 meters away from the platform. Can you kill me at 170 meters? If you can take me down from 170 meters away, I'll shove the helicopter's control stick up my ass." Shilin laughed arrogantly. This helicopter was a military helicopter carrying 2 Tomahawk missiles and a large number of flares. The fuselage of the plane was also bulletproof. How could Sigmund kill me? Sigmund sank slightly, squatting down. "Masaka. Boss, be careful. Sigmund wants to shoot down the plane." Silva, who had climbed halfway, understood Sigmund's intention. "John." A loud noise came from under Sigmund's feet. A 2-meter-wide pit appeared on the helipad, cracks covering the ground. Sigmund's figure had disappeared from the rooftop helipad. Sigmund flew towards the helicopter like a cannonball. Because Sigmund was behind the plane and moving very fast, the helicopter pilot couldn't aim. Therefore, the pilot could only frantically turn on the flare launcher. Sigmund crashed directly into the plane, and the plane was bumped by his impact. The windows of this helicopter are made of bulletproof glass. Once closed, there is no way to open them from the outside. "Don't worry," the pilot reminded, then decided to perform some difficult flight maneuvers to throw Sigmund off. Sigmund condensed an energy on his fist, and the fist glowed with dazzling golden light. This was the prototype of Yuvajan's super destruction fist, just possibly called something different. This move could be considered a common technique, with many non-users knowing it, generally those of the enhancement type. This move had the greatest amplification for the enhancement type. The more non, the greater the power, simple and unadorned but surprisingly effective. This was a hard application. Even Gon, the future protagonist's ultimate killing move, Rock, was an extension of this move. Without a doubt, Sigmund's fist had penetrated the helicopter's protective steel plate. Sigmund happened to hit the plane's engine. Silva and John, who were climbing, also stopped climbing, sticking to the wall and watching the out-of-control helicopter. John decisively jumped down, landing directly on the ground. With the wired body, this height was nothing, no damage at all. After landing, John immediately began to search for the direction of the helicopter's crash. A purple figure landed in front of John. It was Silva. He also jumped down directly. He relied on powerful force-releasing techniques. In the future Chimera Ant extermination arc, Silva descended from the sky and killed Cheeto, who was known as the fastest-running ant. At that time, he fell from a flying dragon mount flying at high altitude, so this height was also acceptable. Silva appeared 2 meters in front of John, half kneeling. Gravel shot out, and Silva smashed a large dent in the cement ground. Chapter 74. Silva also ran towards the direction the helicopter crashed, seemingly with the same goal. Silva daring to rush over like that meant he had already found a way to defeat Sigmund, and John's curiosity drove him to watch the battle. The pilot and Cheryl ejected and deployed their parachutes. Sigmund jumped from the aircraft, but he still couldn't reach Cheryl. Damn it! Sigmund cursed inwardly. If he wasn't unable to transform, he would have riddled Cheryl with bullets long ago. The inability of the first apostle, the righteous paladin, maxed out his enhancement abilities, but the characteristics of other systems became zero. In other words, Sigmund could only use his enhancement type abilities to strengthen his own body. However, Sigmund remained very calm. If he couldn't hit her in the sky, it didn't mean he couldn't hit her on the ground. In fact, John's desire to save Sigmund had been greatly diminished. This was because he suddenly realized that the person he wanted to save was much more powerful than him, having knocked him out with a single punch. John still vividly remembered that fierce punch, and he touched his wrist and followed after them. 2 seconds later, the out-of-control helicopter, 600 meters away from John, crashed first. Although it crashed, the helicopter didn't explode. In reality, helicopters don't explode as easily as they do on TV. Then, Sigmund landed without a parachute. This street was abandoned and under reconstruction, so there weren't many people around. However, the battle in the sky had attracted the attention of many people. But no one came here. Damn it, even an armed helicopter was taken down, what use are the police? The police chief rubbed his temples, intending to ignore these inquiry calls. John's running speed was far inferior to Silva's, and he quickly lost track of him. John really wanted to say, what the hell, he actually lost Silva on such a short distance. Could it be that Silva also wanted Sigmund to kill Cheryl? After all, the current Sigmund was terrifyingly strong, and Silva should also be aware of this. Anyway, the death of the employer wouldn't count as a mission failure. So, did this mean Silva tacitly approved of Sigmund killing Cheryl? John thought for a long time but couldn't figure it out. Cheryl was still in the air with her parachute, but because she didn't know how to control the parachute, she couldn't go far. John arrived at the place where the helicopter crashed. The rotor had broken off and was leaking oil. He didn't find Sigmund. No, John saw a large pit next to it, different from the ones dug by the surrounding construction team. It felt like something had been pressed down. It seemed this was where Sigmund had landed. It seemed that Sigmund had gone to chase Cheryl. John looked up to determine Cheryl's location and ran in her direction. Several gunshots rang out, hitting Cheryl, who was constantly descending with her parachute. The person on the parachute stopped frantically trying to control it and slumped silently in the air. After a brief silence, a scream came. Blood spurted from Sigmund's body, dripping onto passers-by below. It was clear that it was a girl. John turned a corner and found Sigmund weakly leaning against a wall, panting heavily. His eyes were dull and despairing, and Sigmund's mask had turned grey and lost its patterns. Silva was standing in front of Sigmund. The first apostle, the righteous paladin's time was up, and Sigmund was now in a weakened state. He had no chance of winning against Silva now. Hey, Silva, that's enough. Cheryl, the employer, is already dead, there's no need to fight to the death, John reminded Silva, slowly walking over. Silva didn't even turn his head. No, the mission isn't over yet. You're mistaken, my employer has never been Cheryl. My employer is the gang behind him. My mission isn't to protect this small boss, but to kill him as the masked hero. And one last thing, Cheryl isn't dead yet. A light that John had never seen before suddenly appeared in Sigmund's eyes, a light that John couldn't describe. The patterns on the mask changed again. But Silva wouldn't give him a chance. Silva raised his hand, and his fingernails suddenly became sharp. Not good, Silva is going to kill Sigmund. Crimson King, erase the next few seconds. The surrounding environment suddenly turned grey. John could now erase 6 seconds of time. John threw a smooth throwing knife at a tin mailbox near Sigmund. John ran wildly to Sigmund's side, first entering the mirror world himself, and then pulling Sigmund into the mirror world as well. All the actions took 5 seconds, and there was still 1 second left, but strangely, Sigmund's ability hadn't stopped, the patterns were still changing. The change that originally only took 1 second now exceeded 5 seconds. Time began to flow normally, and Silva punched the empty wall. What exactly happened? Silva quickly jumped away several meters, and a chill ran down his spine when he realized that John had also disappeared. John was also very shocked. Sigmund's mask disappeared, it should be outside and not pulled in. John was surprised to find that Sigmund was the kind-hearted uncle he had met once, but Sigmund's nin was intermittent, like a flickering candle in the wind. John grabbed Sigmund's arm and channeled Senjutsu Chakra into him, healing Sigmund's body. "Young man, there's no need to heal me, it's meaningless, I'm doomed to die." Sigmund grabbed John's arm. "How do you know if you don't try?" John immediately summoned Pearl Jam, wanting to heal Sigmund. "No, it's already enough. Fate has already been decided, I knew it a week ago." Sigmund didn't ask what exactly happened here. "I used the sixth apostle, the proof of certain kill, my life is the price of using it. This mask isn't a product of my ability, it's a treasure I obtained in my early years." John was stunned. John always thought that the mask was Sigmund's ability, but he didn't expect it to be a treasure. "Minen was stolen by this mask. As a reward, it will help me kill Cheryl. In fact, the proof of certain kill should be the first apostle, it's the mask's original ability. Every user who uses this ability will have their own Nin stolen and exist as a new ability. A week ago, there was a prophet who predicted my death. I was prepared for death from the beginning of this mission. Why don't you escape? We who do this job have been prepared for death from the beginning, and I have no more attachments. But if you die like this, you'll lose everything." John didn't understand. As long as you keep your life, you can slowly punish evil and eliminate wickedness, why risk your life? There will be, I can kill a few villains, and someone will inherit the path I have walked and continue forward until all the villains are gone. John saw the belief in Sigmund's eyes. John didn't understand his actions, but he respected his spirit and faith. "Then is there anything I can help you with?" Sigmund's eyes were bright. "Please keep your kindness, that's all. Don't lose hope in this world." Immediately, his eyes began to lose focus, and his Nin completely disappeared. Sigmund died. Chapter 75. Sigmund's abilities are based on the mask. The mask is not Sigmund's Nin ability, Sigmund is merely a user of this treasure-like mask. First Apostle. Righteous Paladin, a enhancement type Nin ability that greatly enhances strength, but turns the user into a one-dimensional brute, only able to use enhancement type abilities. Nin abilities of other types absolutely cannot be used, and the user cannot switch to other modes in this state. Can only be used for 3 minutes a day. Second Apostle. Kiss of the Reaper, condenses a mass of Nin energy in both hands, which can disintegrate the Nin energy of others. Like in an exorcist, it dissolves Nin, and once it hits a person, that person will be forever trapped in a state of no Nin. Third Apostle. Demonic Possession, a manipulation type Nin ability that can summon an beast to interfere with the opponent's actions. Fourth Apostle. Eye of Hell, can see through walls and other obstructions to discover objects with Nin. Only using Zetsu can prevent detection, In cannot. While In conceals Nin very well, it still cannot escape the Eye of Hell. Fifth Apostle. Western Star Killer, a conjuration type ability that conjures a handgun with the power of a sniper rifle. The bullet speed is 3 times the speed of sound, but the recoil is very high. Sixth Apostle, proof of certain kill, at the cost of the user's life, it seizes all of the user's power to kill an opponent. A guaranteed kill, a bizarre creature, not an beast, suspected to be a creature from the Dark Continent, will hunt that opponent until the opponent dies. Friendly reminder, the website is about to be, which may cause the loss of reading progress. Please save bookshelf and reading records in time, it is recommended to save screenshots. We apologize for the inconvenience. Chapter 76. Silva looked at the mask on the ground as if facing a formidable enemy. A strange and ominous Nin emanated from the mask, spreading out like a circle. In an instant, the Nin disappeared as if it had never existed. Black, mud-like liquid poured out of the mask, more and more, and the mud-like black liquid coalesced into a human shape. The mask moved to the face of the humanoid monster, as if it were the monster's own face. A black and somewhat transparent humanoid beast, like a ghost, appeared before Silva. No, it couldn't be called an beast, as there wasn't a trace of Nan on its body. Wearing the mask, it walked slowly on its almost transparent feet, without any aura or Nan energy, like a phantom projection. It didn't seem to see Silva, without any defenses. What the hell is this? Silva thought to himself. But looking at this bizarre scene, Silva had an indescribable sense of strangeness. Silva instinctively attributed the disappearance of John and Sigmund to this monster. This monster was 2 meters tall, but very thin, like a bamboo pole. Its palms, however, were very large. The empty spaces of the mask, such as the eyes, nose, and mouth, all presented a deep darkness, enough to scare the pants off most ordinary people. Silva threw an bullet at the monster from a distance. The monster's palm suddenly enlarged and blocked the bullet, or rather, annihilated it. Seeing this, Silva turned and ran. But as soon as he turned his head, he saw the monster, with a simple palm strike. With a bang, Silva was sent flying, smashing through 2 walls. Silva spat out a mouthful of blood, truly seriously injured this time. Both arms were fractured, and 3 ribs on his chest were broken. In that urgent situation, Silva put his 2 arms in a cross defense in front of his chest, but he was still seriously injured. If he hadn't used his hands to block, Silva's heart might have been shattered, sending him directly to meet God. The monster seemed to have stepped on a small bug, ignoring Silva after the attack, or rather, it had never paid attention to such a small bug. Silva was very worried that it would come back to finish him off. What they didn't see was that a foot that had appeared out of nowhere had disappeared again. That's right, that foot that appeared out of nowhere was John's. He had just come out of the mirror world and saw such a brutal scene, so he decisively returned to the mirror world to observe first. Speaking of which, this monster walks so coolly, with a bit of Silver Chariot Requiem's flavor. But the posture is still very different. Silver Chariot is more stable, while this monster walks very floaty. But he didn't dare hand it over to others. John decided to seal it away after it finished killing people and turned back into a mask. John idly indulged in self-delusion while closely following the monster, walking to the vicinity of the injured and unconscious Schelling. John found a good billboard and hid. Looking at Schelling now, there was a person wearing colorful clothes next to him, seemingly giving Schelling emergency aid. There was also a telephone nearby, so it seemed that an ambulance had been called. That person had their back to John, so he couldn't see their face clearly. Because Schelling landed with blood, and because of the gunfire just now, all the pedestrians on the street had run away. The barefoot masked monster stepped on the ground, making a snapping sound, which was still very obvious in the empty street. The person who was helping Schelling also turned around. It's a little trap, bah, it's Lindsay, who had been out of contact for several months since the end of the Hunter exam. Why is he here? John suddenly remembered that he had said that his hometown seemed to be in your new city when he introduced himself before. But the masked monster had already approached, and Lindsay only then discovered its existence. Moreover, this idiot struck a fighting stance against the monster, seemingly wanting to protect Schelling. Who are you? Don't come over, there are wounded here. Lindsay planned to reason, but still made a gesture to counterattack at any time. Lindsay's eyes were full of determination to fight to the end. MD, even a master as strong as Silva couldn't withstand a single blow from this monster. Lindsay, who doesn't even know Nan, might die if he's even grazed by it. Run! Lindsay! John couldn't bother hiding and directly reminded Lindsay in the distance. Oh, it's Mr. Joseph, the alias John used during the Hunter exam. Long time no see. Do you know this monster? Lindsay looked at John with surprise but didn't relax his vigilance against the masked monster at all. Run, this monster is not something you can deal with. Sorry, I refuse. I'm not who I was back then. The me who participated in the Hunter exam with Joseph has also grown up. I won't be a coward, I won't run, come on. Then don't let your legs shake, you bastard. But the distance was too far, even if John used time erase, he had no way to protect Lindsay from that monster's hands, so he could only let Lindsay give up his hostility and run away immediately to have a chance of survival. John was a little irritable now, and the existing stands couldn't solve this situation. Lindsay thought he had grown up and was courting death, and it was still because of him. King Crimson, erase the following time. Everything around turned grey again, and John ran at full speed. The monster had walked 2 meters past Lindsay because of the previous walking state, but after 6 seconds, John was still 10 meters away from Lindsay. Lindsay immediately realized that the monster had moved behind him, and immediately turned around to fight the monster. At the same time, the monster slowly thrust its large palm towards Shelling, who was lying on the ground. Lindsay stood in front of Shelling. "Bastard, listen!" John roared at Lindsay. John stopped and condensed a pistol in his hand. This was Emperor. Bang bang bang, several shots were fired in a row. An bullet also flew from afar, flying to the left side of Lindsay and the monster. With a bang, the Nan bullet exploded, and the explosive force sent Lindsay flying. Lindsay was blown over and didn't understand what had happened. But the monster was not affected at all, and the power of the Nan bullet explosion didn't move it even half a point. But John's bullets had arrived, and the originally straight bullets suddenly made a turn and directly hit Shelling, who was lying on the ground. The masked monster suddenly stopped, turning into a pool of pure black, honey-like viscous liquid, slowly flowing into the mask without a sound. John breathed a sigh of relief. John wanted to use the mask ability's mechanism to solve the problem. The ability of Sixth Apostle, proof of certain death, is to use the life of the trap user to kill a designated person. If that person is killed in advance, then the proof of certain death has no meaning. A grey-white mask without any patterns lay quietly on the ground. If it hadn't been seen with one's own eyes, no one would have believed that a monster was hidden in this seemingly ordinary mask. Chapter 77. John looked towards the end of the road, where a man in black was slowly walking towards them. It was Robson. In your new city, he probably had the best control over his Nan bullets. His combat power and Nan capacity might be far inferior to Silva, who was also an emission type, but his control over Nan bullets far exceeded Silva's. Robson could make Nan bullets turn corners and perform many other special techniques. Lindsay, on the other hand, was sitting on the ground, his face full of shock. Today's experience was more thrilling than the dozen or so years he had lived. He was just happily strolling through the street when he encountered a plane crash and a shooting. He was just about to rescue the victim injured on the parachute when a masked monster suddenly appeared. Although he was very scared, the best thing that happened today was meeting Mr. Joseph, whom he hadn't seen for a long time. This further strengthened his determination. He wanted to show Mr. Joseph that he was no longer a coward and that he had grown. Lindsay was an ordinary person who couldn't use Nan. He couldn't see Robson's Nan bullets, nor could he see John's Emperor pistol stand. In his eyes, when that monster was about to attack him, the surrounding air suddenly exploded, blasting him away. Then, several blood holes, as if shot by bullets, suddenly appeared on the forehead of the person he was trying to protect. The problem was that the wounds corresponded to a wall where no one was present. The Emperor's bullets could turn corners, and he hadn't even heard a gunshot. At the same time, Silva, who had just pulled himself out of the wall, saw Sigmund's body leaning against the wall on the street corner, unable to understand what had happened. Silva dialed the employer's phone, reported Sigmund's death, and notified the employer to quickly pay the remaining balance. Silva hung up the phone and then called for an ambulance. Then, he also leaned against the wall next to Sigmund, although he didn't know what exactly had happened. But what did it matter? Silva wasn't a detective, but this was definitely related to John. The fact that he hadn't seen his body meant he was still alive. John briefly explained the situation, and Robson fell silent. You shouldn't have shot. There are surveillance cameras here. They might cause you trouble afterward, Robson sighed, speaking earnestly. It doesn't matter. Anyway, Sherlin was going to die. If I didn't kill that monster, it would have killed him the next second. But others might not believe you, Robson immediately pointed out the flaw. Suddenly, a robust man about 6 feet 3 inches tall, wearing a black robe, appeared next to Sherlin and picked up the mask that had fallen on the ground. It was as if he teleported, appearing suddenly without any warning. He was also wearing a mask, so his appearance couldn't be seen, but combining his burly figure with the mysterious bulge in his crotch wrapped in black tights, it wasn't hard to tell that this should be an adult male. John and Robson looked at the man in black in horror, like cats with their fur standing on end. If he were to launch a sneak attack, it was unimaginable. John immediately used epitaph to confirm that there was no danger after 5 seconds, and only then did John breathe a sigh of relief. Who are you? That mask is very dangerous, John calmly reminded him because he knew there was no danger. I understand this mask better than you do, the man in black said, but he wasn't looking at John, but at the mask in his hand. That mask is very dangerous. You can give it to me, and I'll seal it. The man in black looked at John with a smile that wasn't quite a smile. Why do you think I would give the mask to you? Then, King Crimson, erase the following time. Next, all he had to do was walk over and take the mask, and then use epitaph to prevent a sneak attack. Perfect. But something shocking happened to John. The man in black in front of John suddenly disappeared with the mask during the time erasure process. John didn't dare to attack rashly before he understood the situation. How exactly did he do it? Why could he use his ability during King Crimson's time erasure? You should know that only King Crimson and Gold Experience Requiem can consciously act during King Crimson's time erasure. Even if Star Platinum's time stop is used before King Crimson, there's no way to move within it. John quietly waited for the end of the time erasure. The time erasure ended. John and Robson looked at the man in black warily. Do you believe in fate? This is fate's arrangement. Now, this mask is destined for me. Perhaps it will be destined for you in the future, but not now. You must be very curious about who I am. In the future, when you grow to a certain point, you will naturally understand everything and know my true identity. I can only tell you that I was the one who divined for Sigmund. Our meeting is also an arrangement of fate. The man in black looked at John intently, like a fanatical religious zealot. And there was also a hint of playfulness, as if he was watching something interesting. The whole place was silent, listening quietly to the words of the man in black. John, fate is in me, and fate is in you. Don't seek perfection, but seek to be true to your heart. The man in black disappeared into thin air as suddenly as he had appeared. Damn charlatan, I don't believe a word you say. What, destined for me? Isn't that the most shameless statement of Buddhism? Back then, Abbot Fahey said destined for me and wanted to force the snake demon Su Xian to convert to Buddhism. My strength is stronger than yours, so your things are destined for me. That's unreasonable robber logic. In fact, strictly speaking, this mask doesn't belong to John either. It's considered an unowned object, but John didn't realize it for a moment. He was cursing in his mouth, but John actually believed the words of the man in black a little bit. John wouldn't be surprised if this world had some Gaia consciousness or Alaya consciousness. Back then, the various Jojo bosses were all struck down by fate when they were close to invincible, and directly GGD. In the early stages of World War II, without stands or atomic bombs, Kar-sama, who became the ultimate being, was still sent into space to become a satellite because of fate. Dio, who possessed time stop, was also defeated because Araki illegally gave Jotaro a copy ability. And there was Father Pucci's wave. Jotaro, who possessed time stop, couldn't be killed no matter what. He took Star Platinum's aura punches to the face and didn't die. If it were a plastic world, it would have exploded long ago. In the end, relying on luck, he successfully reached heaven. Later, Maid in Heaven, which possessed accelerated time and became invincible again, was defeated by Emporio because of fate. Fate is a very mysterious thing. But it has nothing to do with the current John. Because of Robson's powerful control, Lindsay wasn't injured much. John simply told Lindsay the course of events and what had happened in the past 6 months. Afterward, John and the others found a restaurant and had a good meal, but Lindsay, who had just experienced such a bloody murder, still couldn't eat. John had experienced the even bloodier Malak pursuit, so this didn't affect John's appetite at all. On the contrary, Nen abilities attracted Lindsay's attention. After all, he was a young man and was very interested in superpowers. Chapter 78. John bid farewell to Robson's studio, becoming a freelancer, which is to say, unemployed. He politely declined Robson's suggestion that John go to university. What a joke! He'd transmigrated, why would he still go to university? This world's mainstream wasn't about knowledge, it was a shonen battle anime. He'd rather use that free time to train his nin ability and lay the foundation for exploring the Dark Continent in the future, and earn some money along the way. Actually, John was a little tempted. University was safer, and with his strength, he could definitely follow the retired Special Forces king dominating the city trope. But he was only 13 years old, and that thing couldn't be used yet. Even if it could, he wouldn't dare, afraid of attracting underage girls. Based on this, John resolutely gave up. Although John killed Sharon, no one came to hold him responsible afterward. He later learned that Silva had vouched for him, confirming the danger of the masked monster. At the same time, the association sent specialists to understand the situation, asking John a lot about the information of that man in black, but John really didn't know, so they had to give up. What John didn't know was that the monster had caused a great sensation in the industry because this monster was suspected to be a species from the Dark Continent. Just that name alone was worth many people spending great effort to collect information. But John also wanted to know. Welcoming the breeze and the noisy sounds of the city in the morning, John boarded the train and embarked on a new journey. John was heading to the tourist town of Akat, which was very close to Yornu city, only half a day's train ride away. This town had a population of only 200,000, but it attracted a large number of tourists to come and play. Akat town was very close to the sea, but because of the terrain, there were no large docks. A large coastal city was more than 10 kilometers away, so it could not develop large maritime businesses. However, the fishing and tourism industries were very developed. There were super long coastal beaches here that could be developed for tourism. The scenery here was very beautiful, making it a good place to relax. Although it was a tourist city, the history of this town was very long. There were also several ancient dynasty ruins here. Of course, these ruins had long been developed and there was nothing of value left. These ruins were just ancient public facilities and did not have much of value. John booked a luxurious residence, a small villa on a mountain near the sea. It cost 110,000 jenny a day, and this wasn't even the peak tourist season. The price would at least triple in the peak season. Although Sharon was dead, Sigmund, the target of the mafia, was also dead, and the mafia had offered 500 million jenny as a reward. Adding the money he made in the Heavens Arena, John's savings were now close to 1 billion jenny. Also, the game plan about his previous life that John had sent out had received a response. With a profit of more than 1 million jenny, John didn't participate in the game production. These companies had also extended olive branches, but John had rejected them one by one. Now, as a hunter, a single mission was worth tens of millions of jenny, so he didn't care about these small amounts of money. Hey, John, what should I train next? John's thoughts were interrupted. Last night, John drank too much alcohol while eating skewers, and somehow agreed to teach Lindsay an ability. The main thing was that the slurring Robson said that non-users basically had a sure chance of passing the hunter exam, which was too tempting for someone who wanted to take the hunter exam, and then Lindsay came along. John sighed. Next, you can rest for 10 minutes, and then run from here to the tourist beach. John actually had no idea how to teach Lindsay, because he relied on Wilhelm to forcibly open all the pores of his body to get started, but this method was not very suitable for Lindsay. Lindsay's physical fitness was only at the level of a normal junior high school student. Although John was weak, he had at least practiced ripple breathing. Even without a stand, he could beat 6 or 7 ordinary adults without any problem. If Lindsay couldn't learn 10 all of a sudden, she would GG because her aura was exhausted, which would be embarrassing. Lindsay's stamina was far inferior to John's. Releasing aura for 2 minutes might really kill her. Nen ability can also be learned by exercising and then meditating and practicing Zen, gradually opening the pores of the body little by little. It's just that the cycle is a bit long, taking several months. Watching Lindsay run out with a determined look, John nodded thoughtfully. After confirming that Lindsay had run far away, John secretly turned on his phone. Hello, is this Wilhelm sensei? I am John. Can you teach me how to teach Nen ability to others? Oh, John, do you also want to take in disciples? But your cultivation is far from enough. If you want to teach disciples, improve your Nen ability level. But I have already promised people, now if I say. Is that so, you want to abide by a man's promise? Wilhelm, who was still in the Heavens Arena, nodded to show his approval of John's integrity. As expected, John has reached this age. What kind of age have I reached? Explain it to me. But John didn't dare to refute. I always feel like you've misunderstood something, but I'm begging you. John briefly explained Lindsay's situation, and Wilhelm also simply helped John think of some methods. But John, what do you think the hunter exam is for? It is to select people with strong physical fitness to learn an ability. His body is too weak, it may be difficult to learn an ability. Of course, John knew, because the essence of an ability is life energy, and it is difficult for people with low physical fitness to learn an ability. Of course, if the willpower is strong enough, it is also possible, because an ability is actually quite metaphysical. After finishing the call, he began to browse the city's tourist routes, considering which restaurant to eat at next. As expected, this is the life I want. If it weren't for the battle at the beginning, maybe I would still be living a carefree campus life, constantly drawing cards and becoming stronger with the accumulation of time. But the current self is undoubtedly stronger than the self cowering in school, right? The dangerous environment passively forced me to work hard to become stronger and constantly grow. But even so, John still longed for a peaceful life like a plant. John thought of the black-clothed man's remarks about fate last night. In fact, John's first battle was triggered by a coincidence. A non-user's battle affected ordinary people, and the non-user specifically chased him, an ordinary person. This probability was terrifyingly low. John couldn't help but wonder if there really was a fate that controlled all things in the dark. Chapter 79. John had been in this town for over a week. Unsurprisingly, Lindsay's non-ability training hadn't shown any progress, but Lindsay's physical fitness had indeed improved. Ah! Ah! A series of delicate moans drifted over. John sighed, looking speechlessly at Lindsay. Lindsay, could you not moan so seductively? It's just healing. The fatigue and hidden injuries from excessive strenuous training were nothing to John. With the double healing abilities of Ripple and Pearl Jam, fatigue and hidden injuries were non-existent. Lindsay had become more and more adorable in the half-year they hadn't seen each other. John shook his head, dispelling these dangerous thoughts. It was just the healing effect of Pearl Jam, yet it was made to sound so seductive. He still vaguely remembered that night of grilling skewers. John had his first drink in this life, but he didn't expect this body's alcohol tolerance to be so poor. Although his strength had increased countless times, his alcohol tolerance was less than half of his previous life's. John had thought that in his previous life, he could down any alcohol in one go, but after a small half cup of the water of life, he lost his memory. When John woke up, all the gold coins he had just obtained were gone, and several cards were already lying in his system backpack. He couldn't remember when he had drawn the prizes at all. There was no auspicious day chosen, no bathing and incense burning, not even the memory of drawing the cards. Based on the vanished gold coins and the extra items in his backpack, John could roughly guess what had happened. One was an item card, Teresa's original underwear. Based on the underwear, John easily judged Teresa's bust size. Not bad compared to others her age. Also, he obtained a new stand, Craftwork. Craftwork first appeared in the 5th part, Vento Oreo, as the ability of a forgotten villain defeated by the meat puppet assassin, Meloni. Craftwork's ability is to fix objects in places he likes with no quantity limit. He can also indirectly fix objects, sealing the opponent's movements. He can also fix objects in the air as footholds for movement. It is a highly versatile stand. Craftwork. Destructive power, A. Speed, A. Range, E. Durability, C. Precision, E. Potential, E. And finally, there was a skill card, Noriaki Kakyoin's kanji cooking technique, Kakyoin's special skill, adding ingredients in front of the opponent and feeding it to them to deepen their fear. John wanted to slam the table after seeing this. However, Craftwork's ability was not bad, so he didn't lose out. Finally, there were some gold coins left, not enough to exchange for a card, but he was close. He could do daily tasks for a few more days. Anyway, he was idle, and to be honest, John had been exploring the city these past few days, while Lindsay had no entertainment time at all. John felt guilty when he thought of this. But if he wanted to quickly learn Nen, he had to endure hardship. But John still decided to take this opportunity to let Lindsay relax. It's not like John wanted to see the little Shota Lindsay in a swimsuit. Absolutely not. Hey, Lindsay, do you want to go to the beach this afternoon to relax? Lindsay said weakly, although I don't feel well, I can still meditate. Don't worry about me, go have fun yourself. You need to combine work and rest. Being so tense is not conducive to Nen training. This was John talking nonsense. But Lindsay was a novice in terms of Nen ability, completely a blank slate. No matter how John fooled him, he wouldn't know or be able to verify it. But I always feel like you're lying to me. What a terrifying intuition. Are you a woman? But John still greeted him with a smile. How could that be? Am I that kind of person? Who are we to each other? I wouldn't lie to you. Last time you even called yourself Joseph, and now? When you're drifting in the pugilistic world, how can you not get stabbed? It would be great to have a smurf account at this time. I'm doing this for her safety. Although Lindsay was still suspicious, he was obviously tempted, but suddenly thought of something and stubbornly refused. John seemed to have thought of something and suddenly looked at Lindsay with a shocked expression. Could it be that your Okinchin has started to develop? John recalled a junior high school classmate in his previous life who was very inferior because his Okinchin was too big, and all the boys in the class laughed at him. But at the reunion 5 years later, almost all the male classmates looked at him with envy. Now John's Okinchin hadn't shown any signs of development, and he didn't know what a behemoth it would become in the future. John looked at Lindsay with a complicated expression, with implications that Lindsay couldn't understand. It's not because of that kind of thing. What's on your mind? Are you a pervert? Lindsay blushed and took a few steps back as if looking at a pervert. So cute, as expected of a boy. John had no choice but to sigh at how unfair God was. Seeing that Lindsay was determined not to go to the beach, probably because of a lame excuse like not knowing how to swim, it was indeed possible that Lindsay, who was born in a big city, might not know how to swim. John didn't try to persuade him any further, and since he didn't want to go, John wouldn't force him. John chose a suitable place on the beach and rented a shed. Although it was a bit expensive, John was now a rich man, and this little money was nothing in John's eyes. John was too lazy to haggle and rented it directly. John was wearing big sunglasses and floral shorts, lying on a deck chair, looking very strange. Other people of his age were either playing in the sea or playing in the sand. Only John sat on the deck chair like an adult, watching the people coming and going. The sunglasses were just to hide his gaze. Looking at the white waves passing by, John was very content. This was the real purpose of sunglasses. After all, even though John was tall due to genetics and exercise, he was still only 13 years old, looking like a 15 or 16-year-old boy who was starting to develop. If he looked directly at them like this, he would be considered a little pervert. The meaning of sunglasses was thus manifested. On the beach, young ladies wearing revealing clothes walked past John without hesitation. But John's Okinchin hadn't reached the age where it could be used yet, and there was no reaction. This was truly a sad story. At this moment, John's butt trembled. John immediately took out the phone he had placed behind his butt. And decided that from today onwards, he would never set his phone to vibrate mode. Opening the phone, he saw 2 emails. This has to start with Robson. Robson still felt quite guilty towards John, so he wanted to help John. Since he didn't like being a crime hunter, he would try other things. So Robson sent some of John's information to the Hunter website platform, and sent his resume to some well-known hunters. Recently, someone had contacted John. He received 2 emails, and the senders were all acquaintances. One was Kite, Jing's disciple and Gon's teacher. He performed quite well in the Chimera Ant arc, and was later killed by the Royal Guard Neferpitu. He was reincarnated into a little girl's body through Crazy Slot's. Crazy Slot's ability was very strong, and John also admired Kite very much and wanted to befriend him. But his mission was to protecting a newly discovered endangered species from poachers until the public relations above were done and the species was listed as a protected animal, and the issuance of documents would be considered the end. But the mission cycle was too long, the remuneration was not much, and he had to live in an isolated forest for a long time. The last wilderness survival was still vivid in his mind, so John politely declined. There was also an invitation from an acquaintance, Satos, who was the examiner of the first hunter exam in the original work. Like Jing, he was a ruins hunter, and had participated in the development of 3 very famous ancient ruins. His commission was to find an ancient ruin and explore the ruin first without damaging it, and defeat the thieves who came to make money. The remuneration was a little better than the previous one, but not much, but compared to protecting animals, John was more interested in exploring ruins. This may be a common problem of Chinese people, or it may be because he watched too much Ghost Blows Out the Light, and John strangely accepted the task. He had to reach the designated location within a week, and John looked at it and it wasn't very far, about 3 days to arrive. After agreeing to Satos, John realized that he had overlooked one person, and that was Lindsay. He wanted to learn an ability and had been doing it for a while, but he didn't have much combat power yet. It was difficult to make Lindsay form combat power in a short time, but John had promised him, so John had a bold idea. That's right, it was to temporarily suspend the teaching of an ability and let Lindsay learn Ripple first. But John's Ripple was given directly by the system, and he wasn't sure if people in this world could also practice Ripple. Chapter 80. John decided to let Lindsay give it a try. This used to be one of his trump cards, but now his strength had basically shifted away from Ripple, focusing on stands. Besides the daily Ripple training, the rest of his time was spent training his stand and abilities. The development potential of Ripple and its increase in combat power couldn't compare to Nin abilities. This world didn't have vampires or pillar men, greatly reducing the usefulness of Ripple. However, walking on water, vertical climbing, Ripple healing, and strengthening the body still had irreplaceable uses. In comparison, John hoped to draw a spin ability, as the destructive power of spin was very versatile and powerful, but John couldn't draw it. Ripple training required a master to guide the entry, helping the disciple to awaken Ripple. Natural Ripple users like Joseph were very rare. Entering Ripple was much simpler than Nin abilities, but reaching a high level wasn't much easier than Nin abilities. However, Ripple breathing was still good for self-defense. The more John thought about it, the more excited he became. If Ripple could be taught to others, then if he exchanged for the arrow in the future, could he allow people in this world to also gain stand abilities? John immediately got up and returned to prepare for an experiment. But an ominous feeling surged into his heart. He didn't move his position, didn't actively approach John, just quietly waited for the opportunity, like a venomous snake hiding in the grass waiting for its prey to approach. Quietly waiting for the people directly around John to decrease, waiting for the moment John got up and revealed his target, waiting for the sun to be directly behind him. Then, at the moment he pulled the trigger, all the preparation, all the waiting had meaning. The gun in his hand fired a bullet. John had already sensed the bullet, but it was too late. The bullet had already entered John's chest. This bullet could penetrate even steel. There were no surveillance cameras here, ordinary people couldn't see or hear my ability, this was undoubtedly a perfect assassination. Then, John's chest should burst with a lot of blood, his eyes unwillingly searching the crowd for the person who ambushed him, then entering death with a stomach full of doubt. Or perhaps he would let out a dying whimper or moan. I'm really looking forward to it. But the image of John in his fantasy didn't appear. Not only didn't it appear, John also disappeared into thin air. He knew deeply the power of his bullet, it could create a bloody hole in John's chest, but John disappeared into thin air. He thought, could it be that John dodged the bullet, but if John dodged the bullet, then a bullet crater would definitely appear on the beach. But there wasn't, there was nothing. He knew that all of this was beyond his expectations, he knew he was in trouble. But deep down, there wasn't a trace of panic. Ever since he chose this path, he had such a preparation. A preparation to be killed. He who kills will be killed. Those who easily take the lives of others will one day have their lives taken. But where was John? He was confused. The old man applying sunscreen on his back was still diligently applying sunscreen as always, but how would he know that the person he was truly serving had just carried out a failed assassination and was about to be in mortal danger? The force on his back disappeared in an instant. He turned around and fired his gun at the fastest speed of his life. The bullet had already been fired, this was his last chance to turn the tables, but what made him despair was that a red arm appeared in front of John. The red hand grabbed his supersonic bullet as if pinching a mosquito. All his hopes were gone. John casually broke the man's 2 arms and 1 leg. Who sent you here? John's eyes were full of indifference, he had no doubt that John would kill him. No one, it was me myself. The man said angrily, his last bit of sanity maintaining his execution of the final escape plan. Based on his analysis of John's actions in previous incidents, it wasn't difficult to see that John had a naivety and kindness rare in the hunter world. This was John's weakness, and it was also his only chance to escape now. I am a supporter of Sigmund, you killed him. Are you killing me for money? John seemed to ignore his rebuttal and defense. Of course not. With a poof sound, he felt his chest was hot, an arm had pierced through his chest. He didn't understand, in his deduction, John should be a person with justice and compassion, how could he kill him like this? John spat a mouthful of saliva on him, you're dumbfounded, right? I can read minds, I can tell right away if you are lying, you trash. John had used Sex Pistols and Nin's flow to withstand the previous bullet, and then immediately used King Crimson to jump behind the opponent. As for his rebuttal, John used him to test him, he didn't say a single true word. What was most annoying was that he abused the masked hero Sigmund's name to commit crimes. He was a scum who could trample on other people's lives for money. John wouldn't keep this scourge around, even the most gentlemanly Jonathan Wood couldn't help but kill some hopeless social garbage. John wasn't a pacifist newbie, as long as his life was threatened and he could handle it, John would still kill his opponent without hesitation. But compared to the Black Will, John still had a sense of compassion. John really couldn't guess who wanted to kill him. Not good, John couldn't help but curse inwardly. With a bang sound, John disappeared from the spot and quickly returned to the villa where he was staying. At the same time, Lindsay, clutching her bleeding arm, hid in the room. But the steel security door had already been dented and was creaking. At most 3 more hits, and the door wouldn't hold. Lindsay frantically kicked open the glass door of the balcony and jumped down from the second-floor balcony. Thump! Lindsay fell to the ground without any protection, and several ribs were obviously broken. With a bang explosion, a disheveled, hip-hop style dressed, 30-something blonde man followed closely and also jumped down from the building, his face with a ferocious smile, wanting to step on and kill this Lindsay who had brought him so much embarrassment from the high altitude. Eat my Thompson ripple breathing. Chapter 81. Lindsay didn't understand what that sentence meant. John kept muttering things like, humans have their limits, unless they transcend humanity. I'm done being human, Jojo. And this is my last ripple. He just thought those words sounded cool. Inexplicably, they were very dashing. However, although the opponent was weak, he was still a mature non-user. Lindsay's counterattack speed and timing weren't very good, and the Thompson submachine gun he bought on the black market was of inferior quality and lacked power. The opponent directly used Ken to block the bullets. At this time, John was still 4 kilometers away from the villa. John didn't even dare to use time erase now, because time erase was not the same as time stop after all. Time erase had too many uncertainties. What if Lindsay didn't react to the time erase and got killed? John didn't dare to gamble. With a bang, the blonde man kicked down, and some cracks appeared on the cement floor. Lindsay rolled to the side, avoiding the blonde man's landing kick. Lindsay's scalp tingled as he looked at the cracks on the ground, which were exactly where his head had been. If he hadn't dodged just now, that kick would have killed him. Pfft! Lindsay spat out a mouthful of blood. He was no longer able to fight. The blonde man had suddenly broken into the house, startling Lindsay, who was actually meditating. The moment Lindsay saw the man from upstairs, he understood the situation. He immediately wedged something against the door, preparing to call for help. The blonde man downstairs also discovered Lindsay, who was secretly observing from upstairs. The blonde man was an enhancer, and ordinary anti-theft doors couldn't withstand the continuous attacks of an enhancer. Don't worry, I won't kill you. You're bait to lure out a certain man, the blonde man said with a playful look. But after hearing his guarantee, Lindsay didn't feel any hope. He was definitely here to seek revenge on John. Whoosh, 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 a strange sound rang out. The blonde man looked up and saw a toy plane flying in the sky. But Lindsay didn't seem to notice at all. It's an inability attack. The blonde man's heart sounded an alarm. But the intelligence said that John shouldn't have this ability. Then who conjured it? The blonde man was very puzzled. But he didn't have more time to think. The plane had already launched an attack. The plane fired wildly at the blonde man, with great speed. The blonde man dodged the attacks in a very embarrassed manner, but he could no longer get close to Lindsay. No, he made up his mind, he had to get to Lindsay's side quickly. Only by controlling Lindsay would he have bargaining chips. But John wouldn't give him the chance. Although the accuracy of Aerosmith's attacks wasn't great, it couldn't withstand the indiscriminate bombing. The blonde man recognized his situation and decided to take a gamble. After all, Lindsay's side was the safest place now. John shouldn't be so insane as to kill his good friend. But was Aerosmith's bombing so easy to dodge? Although he used Ken, the blonde man's whole body was covered in blood. Suddenly, he had many more injuries, and blood flowed all over the ground. Lindsay suddenly appeared behind him. A strange feeling surged into his heart, but there was no time. He had already seen John 200 meters away. The plane was firing wildly at his back, and John was also shooting at him with a pistol, Emperor. It was truly a wolf in front and a tiger behind, but the blonde man could still tell the difference between the two. Based on John's winning streak in the Heavens Arena, facing John head-on would be certain death. On the contrary, it might be possible to fight the little plane behind him. The strange feeling appeared again. John was less than 50 meters away from the blonde man. That's right, John used time erase, making him perform meaningless actions during that time, and then John kept approaching. He couldn't care about so much anymore. The blonde man ignored John behind him and rushed straight towards Lindsay in front. His chest was covered in bloody holes blasted out by Aerosmith, and the amount of blood loss was terrifying. If he didn't get treatment soon, he would die sooner or later. Regardless of whether he was an user or not, he wasn't a vampire. Losing too much blood would really kill him. But he couldn't think about more. If he ran away now, he would definitely not be able to outrun the uninjured John. Either way, he would die, so he might as well take a gamble. Looking at the crazy person rushing up, Aerosmith, who was blocking in front to protect Lindsay, temporarily retreated. Aerosmith's defense wasn't high, and John would also be injured if he took a heavy blow. Moreover, Aerosmith's flexibility was average, which was why John didn't like using Aerosmith. But in this situation, only Aerosmith among John's stands could help. But the sudden attack still disrupted John's formation, and he couldn't help but command Aerosmith to dodge. This gave the blonde man a chance. No, he couldn't be called the blonde man anymore. His hair was also dyed red with blood. Every piece of good flesh on his body was covered in bloody holes blasted out by Aerosmith. His face was invisible, like a devil from hell. If it weren't for the belief in his heart, he would have already died. His hand was only 1 meter away from Lindsay. Lindsay's heart was filled with fear, unwillingness, regret, and then determination. I will definitely not die. I will definitely not die before I do those things. Lindsay roared, his pale face unable to hide his anger. But Lindsay had just learned Nen and couldn't even find N, let alone use Nen abilities to defend. Shine, die. But the blonde man found that he couldn't lift his foot anymore. At this time, an accident occurred. A syringe about 0.8 meters long suddenly appeared in Lindsay's hand. What happened? Lindsay's Nen ability? John had many questions in his mind, but he didn't stop his actions. Even Lindsay himself was stunned. The blonde man couldn't move because the handicraft indirectly fixed the blonde man on the ground. But John had only done this. The syringe was definitely not the blonde man's Nen ability, so that meant it was Lindsay's Nen ability. Suddenly condensing Nen abilities from an ordinary person who didn't know Nen at all, it would definitely pay a great price. John wouldn't give the opponent another chance. The blue figure burst out from John's body. Aura 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 aura. The blonde man could no longer get up. Chapter 82. These desperate criminals who coveted John's head had already been dealt with, but the mastermind behind them remained unknown. In the end, John still couldn't figure out who wanted to kill him. With this question in mind, John logged into the Hunter's website to search for relevant information. Sure enough, John easily found detailed information about himself on the website. It cost 10,000 Jenny, which made John want to say MMP, but much of the information was still lacking. The part about John's abilities only mentioned Stone Free, Silver Chariot, and Emperor, the stands John usually displayed. His other stands were completely unknown, which relieved John. Moreover, much of this information was outdated. Anyone who came after him based on the information there would surely die. John also found that someone had put a bounty on his head online, about 500 million Jenny. The reward was quite generous, but no one from the Zaldik family had taken the job. However, because John's permission level wasn't high enough, he couldn't find out the information about the mastermind. Another thing was that Lindsay had successfully awakened her Nen ability, and without going through the long period of imagination training like Kurapika, she manifested a syringe, which was very strange. There's no such thing as a free lunch in the world. Such an explosive increase in strength must have its drawbacks. But Lindsay didn't seem to show any discomfort on the surface, so John was temporarily relieved. However, Lindsay's Nen was far less than that of ordinary people, which might be the price Lindsay paid. Lindsay roughly understood the ability of this syringe, it was to extract and release. It could easily extract viruses or bacteria from other people's bodies, and of course, it could also draw blood. John was shocked when he first heard about this ability. Perhaps because Lindsay was kind-hearted and had a doctor's heart, this ability had a flaw: as long as the other party resisted slightly, she couldn't extract anything from their body. Of course, if the other party lost consciousness, she could extract it. Another ability was to release the extracted substance. But it could only be released when the needle tip touched an object, and it couldn't be released directly into the air. However, releasing the substance in the syringe could be done without the other party's consent. Overall, this ability was not bad, and it suited Lindsay's personality, but it had no combat power, and Lindsay's physical skills were too poor, and her ability required close combat to activate. In general, Lindsay still had no combat power, but she should have no problem protecting herself. Lindsay's temperament was first class, and she learned 10 in a few minutes. This far exceeded John's expectations, which meant that if her aura nodes were forcibly opened, Lindsay could also learn Nen before her energy was exhausted. Now that Lindsay had learned Nen, the Ripple training could be put on hold for the time being. After all, Nen was more important. As long as she roughly learned Ren, she wouldn't die so easily. John used the Sendo Ripple Overdrive and Pearl Jam to quickly heal Lindsay's injuries. Then he taught Lindsay some basic Nen skills, not bothering with gradual progress. He didn't know when the next attack would come, and after only an hour, John decided to find a chance to escape. John carried Lindsay and jumped onto the speeding train, sticking tightly to the top of the train. This was the popular train hanging ticket from India in his previous life. Because this train's speed was nearly 300 miles per hour, although it couldn't compare to the maglev trains of his previous life in China, it was still quite fast. No one would pay attention to whether anyone got on a moving train. After all, this train wasn't a super slow train from India. No one could stand on such a speeding train. But John's Ripple couldn't last that long. Fortunately, John had the stand handwork, which could easily stick to the top of the train. Lindsay was sleeping soundly in the sleeping bag on John's back. Because of the intense battle just now, the energy consumed by awakening her Nen ability, plus John using various abilities to accelerate the recovery of her injuries, Lindsay's mental and physical strength had long been exhausted, and she was sound asleep, completely unaware of where John had taken her. It wasn't that John was trying to evade the fare, he wasn't short of that little money. John's hunter license allowed him to ride this company's trains for free, but John didn't dare to show his hunter license. John still didn't know who wanted to kill him, and those who came to hunt him down were all powerful experts. It was hard to guarantee that there wouldn't be some advanced hackers who would find out about John and Lindsay taking the train if they tried hard enough. There were no airships to take here, so John could only use the Indian-style, Seng Ch, free ride, method to escape that city. He didn't even dare to go inside the train. John could only break a window or cut open the roof to get in, but that would directly expose him, which would be pointless. So John honestly hung on the roof of the train. This assassination attempt had failed. If they took the train, they would definitely be discovered, so if they drove to escape, they were very likely already ambushing on the road out of town. Therefore, John wanted to confuse them, making them think that John was still there, and then run to another city. Although John wasn't afraid of assassination, he hated it very much. John had Crimson King's epitaph and Mirror Man's mirror world. Most of the attacks in the world could be avoided in advance, but if the other party attacked when John was taking a shit, even John would be very embarrassed. John was very pretentiously using his wits to fight his opponents on the top of the train, but reality was very harsh. John wasn't dashing at all on the top of the train. The super huge wind pressure brought by the high-speed train, even though he used Ren, still made John unable to open his eyes. His hands and feet were all stuck to the train, fluttering in the wind like a plastic bag hanging on the door handle of a speeding car. After John arrived at the next station, he used a public phone booth to call Satos and asked him to book a hotel for John so he could rest. John immediately opened the system in his mind and started drawing cards without saying a word. Originally, John planned to collect 5 cards before drawing them all at once, but plans couldn't keep up with changes. John was in a very embarrassing situation now after hitchhiking on the train. Now John's wish was very simple, he just wanted Sticky Fingers or Crazy Diamond. Only these 2 stands could easily hitchhike on the train. But fate didn't favor him. John did draw a stand, but it was a useless one. Stand, Hanged Man. Destructive Power, E. Precision, E. Development Potential, E. This stand was very trash. It was the earliest type of stand, and like Silver Chariot, it was a blank slate without special abilities. The old man who was its user was clearly outsmarted by Kokyuan. Hanged Man was also the first cannon fodder stand in Part 3. It moves extremely fast in a narrow space, but it's still a little slower than Silver Chariot, and its attack power is far from enough. Some enhancement type Nen users using Ren could probably not even break its skin. And its defense is extremely low. If it's caught, its user is almost certain to die. Moreover, the meaning of Hanged Man is very bad. Hanged Man symbolizes a failed journey and danger. Chapter 83. However, facts proved that there was no such metaphysics. As expected, since Joseph's account was no longer used, no traffic accidents occurred. It seemed the previous misfortune was caused by the name Joseph. The journey continued without incident. Satsai chartered a bus to pick up John. However, Satsai himself didn't come. He invited not only John but also many Nan users and some people with great power, although they didn't know Nan, to protect the ruins together. The mission location was in Yotark town. About 5 days ago, someone discovered an ancient ruin near Yotark town. According to Satsai and some industry insiders, it should be the tomb of King Alan's brother, dating back 1,000 years. There are many legends about King Alan, but John, being a non-native, knew very little about him, only that he was a very powerful monarch, roughly equivalent to Qin Shi Huang or Alexander. However, he had 3 brothers, each of whom would have been a remarkable figure in any other era, but unfortunately, they all appeared in the same era. However, 2 of them greatly respected their elder brother, King Alan, but the last one rebelled during the middle of King Alan's reign. Although the rebellion was successfully suppressed, the country was no longer able to conquer other countries. The location of King Alan and his brothers' tombs remains a mystery to this day. This tomb should be of the standard befitting a prince of that era, but it is unknown which of King Alan's brothers it belongs to. This time, there were no more twists and turns, and they arrived in Yotark town on the 3rd day. John and Satsai had a brief meeting at the station. Satsai didn't say anything extra, simply telling John the relevant information about the ruins in a business-like manner. Just asking, "Can I also participate in this activity?" Lindsay was very excited after hearing the relevant information and wanted to participate. "You're far from ready. You just learned Nan and you're already thinking of reaching the sky in one step. Just stay put." John couldn't help but reprimand Lindsay. She hadn't even learned the 4 major principles of basic Nan, yet she wanted to participate in such a dangerous mission. Was she tired of living? "I've already made up my mind." Lindsay was very determined, apparently having her head turned by the Nan she had just acquired. In the hunter world, justice without strength and meddling in other people's business can lead to a miserable death. Now, Lindsay might be able to fight back if she encounters danger, but if she encounters a phantom troop member when John isn't around, she will definitely die. Lindsay's hometown is in Yornu City, and the troop will wreak havoc there in the future. Given Lindsay's personality, she might go to help. Then you are responsible for your own safety. "We won't pay for your recklessness," Satsai warned again. "That's exactly what I want," Lindsay also replied solemnly. John saw that Lindsay was so determined and couldn't refute her. After all, he wasn't Lindsay's family and didn't have the right to interfere with her choice. Although John decided to look after Lindsay during the mission, he also decided that if Lindsay encountered danger, John wouldn't immediately rescue her, but would let her suffer a bit to understand the preciousness of life. Because the value of this tomb was only recently discovered, the exploration mission was cancelled. Because even a slight damage here would be a huge loss to the historical research community. Therefore, Satsai decided to recruit some professional archaeologists to excavate it slowly. If John and the others, who were laymen, were to do it, they could explore it quickly, but they might cause irreparable damage. This meant that John and the others had to intercept all opponents before the tomb raiders entered, and prevent them from approaching the tomb area, greatly increasing the difficulty. Satsai also briefly introduced his teammates, all of whom were guaranteed to have good character or were vouched for by some prestigious people in the industry, such as John. There was an arrogant old man with white hair and beard looking up to the sky, and a dignified middle-aged uncle standing upright in a formal suit. Among the people present, these 2 gave John a very different feeling. This was the aura of strong people. Although they both had a thin layer of Nan attached to their bodies, it was only Ren, but their Nan made John feel a sense of crisis. This meant that if John wasn't careful, they were likely to have the ability to seriously injure or even kill John. They seemed to be veteran Nan users. John was determined to stay away from them later, otherwise, if they saw Crimson King's ability, it would be difficult to silence them. Overly powerful Nan abilities always attract the covetousness of others, like Nanika, who is still locked in the isolation zone. One reason is that her ability to make spoiled requests is too terrifying and is related to killing people who are related to those who have not completed the spoiled requests. The second reason is that this ability is too terrifying. Before they have thoroughly researched it, they dare not release her. Once someone finds a way to control it, it will be terrible. Similarly, Hunter Chairman Netaro's Bodhisattva Guanyin is also very powerful, but no one covets his ability. Even the fearless Krollo has never had any ideas about Bodhisattva Guanyin. Because Netero is too strong enough to match this powerful ability. The value of John's Crimson King far exceeds the pure fighting Bodhisattva Guanyin. Netero is strong, so Bodhisattva Guanyin is strong. John is strong, because his stand is strong. If John were to control Bodhisattva Guanyin, he would still be blown away by some experts. John's strength does not match Crimson King's ability. John believes that if Crimson King's ability is leaked, Crollo will come to check John's water meter within a month, or he might be controlled by a control-type expert before Crollo comes. This is why John has never dared to let others know about the existence of Crimson King. Necessary caution is still needed. John doesn't even have mate in heaven, so what qualifications does he have to be arrogant in this high-risk world? The level of terror in this world is too high. Unless you have the power of the world over heaven to modify reality, the monsters of the Dark Continent will teach you a lesson in minutes. The guards present exchanged greetings to familiarize themselves with each other and confirmed the password. The dignified middle-aged man and the arrogant white-haired old man guarded the most central tomb entrance, while the others protected them in layers on the periphery. Even Satsai himself arranged himself on the periphery, completely entrusting the tomb to these two people. I don't know who they are, but it can be seen that Satsai admires these two people. I remember in the Hunter x Hunter manga, Satsai also admired another person like this, who was the protagonist's father, one of the top 10 non-users, the boar of the Zodiac 12 Jin Freaks. Chapter 84. These two people are very impressive, but what does that have to do with me, John? However, with them here, I don't have to worry about John watching these two, instead, I feel very relieved. With these two big shots backing me up, it means that if I really can't win this round, I can run without revealing my trump cards. Especially that old man, the sense of crisis he brings to John is even stronger than that of Silva and Wilhelm. This old man must be a master, and John inadvertently glanced at the several different kinds of short weapons the old man was carrying on his back. If I'm not mistaken, this old man should be skilled with short weapons. Such a strong and sharp aura indicates he must be a cold weapon master, John said to Lindsay, quietly sharing his guess while looking at the old man. The old man didn't pay attention to John's comments. Lindsay rolled her eyes. Just look at the old man's get-up and you'd know that. You didn't need to say it. He's carrying mandarin duck knives, bagua mandarin duck knives, butterfly swords, a single-edged sword, and a dagger on his back. He's also holding a halberd, and his hands are wrapped in iron claws. Unless you're blind, you can tell he's a cold weapon expert. Besides the halberd, all the other weapons are short-range weapons. So amazing, how do you know the names of all these weapons? Aren't these basic knowledge for a martial artist? John smiled awkwardly and scratched his head, not answering. But this old man, his strength shouldn't be that strong, right? A person can only train 2 or 3 weapons to their peak. Using so many weapons will only distract him. Lindsay suddenly stopped mid-sentence. No, that's not right. Most of these weapons might be used to confuse opponents. He might only focus on 1 or 2, but the other weapons can create psychological pressure. No, that's not it, John said seriously, shaking his head. If it's this old man, he might actually be proficient in all these weapons. This old man's strength might be the strongest I've ever seen. Their discussion didn't escape the old man's ears. He looked at John in surprise. He didn't expect that someone would recognize his strength. Why? Lindsay asked. Nice, the old man also wanted to ask the same question. Haven't you noticed? If this old man isn't a medical student, then he must be very old. Someone who is so arrogant and looks down on people can live to be so old in this dangerous world, how could he not have some tricks up his sleeve? Otherwise, he would have been beaten to death long ago. Lindsay. Is that how you judge a person's strength? Old man. Is that really the reason? Is that how you judge a person's strength? Who is your teacher? I'll beat him to death. The old man turned his head away with a dark expression, ignoring John. After all, John's aura was very ordinary and the amount wasn't large. However, he wasn't going to bother with a junior, out of sight, out of mind. Although it makes sense, but... Makes sense my foot. You actually believe this little bastard's nonsense? The old man couldn't help but roar inwardly. He was about to leave when he heard these words. But what does it have to do with studying medicine? I also study medicine, Lindsay asked, looking at John in confusion. Haven't you heard? Haven't you heard that medical, legal, and programming students lose their hair quickly? These things consume brain power and make you age faster. What he said does make sense, the old man nodded, thinking of his old friend and agreeing very much, but what does this have to do with the topic at hand? Get back here. The old man felt like he couldn't hold back his knife anymore. But I think medicine is very interesting. Studying medicine shouldn't be as scary as you say. Don't be alarmist, medicine is actually very interesting, Lindsay couldn't help but retort. John looked at Lindsay in surprise, as if he was seeing her in a new light. I didn't expect you to be this kind of person. I treat you like a brother, but I didn't expect you to be a bookworm. Still saying that studying medicine is fun. I understand what you mean. You're saying that the old man is either a noob or a master, Lindsay said, blushing. That's not much different from what I said. Wait, when did I say he was a noob? There's a murderous aura. John immediately summoned Silver Chariot behind him. Hey? Satch didn't understand the meaning of this meme at all. It's okay, I won't kill him. Today, I must teach this little brat a lesson in manners, the old man said, gnashing his teeth as he looked at John. The world is so beautiful, why are you so irritable? Silver Chariot's speed far exceeded the old man's, but the old man's swordsmanship far exceeded John's. In addition, there was a lot of aura on the old man's blade. If this continued, Silver Chariot's blade might break. John immediately stopped, and Silver Chariot disappeared instantly. John's advantage was that Silver Chariot's blade length was far superior to the old man's, and Silver Chariot's speed was infinitely close to the speed of light, so the old man didn't dare to attack rashly. How dangerous, old man, John disturbed the old man with words. Likewise, young man. Actually, John was also giving him an out, mainly to confirm the old man's true strength. After all, John had only felt it before, and it didn't count. Wilhelm's aura far exceeded Silva's, but the actual fight might not be that different. This was mainly because Wilhelm was a martial artist from the Sky Arena, who needed to defeat his opponents with an overwhelming aura, creating an excellent visual effect. Silva was born into an assassin family, and didn't need long battles. In general, they would take the target's life in a very short amount of time. Different fighting styles created different auras for the two. One was a roaring tiger in the forest, and the other was a venomous snake waiting for an opportunity. Both could threaten life, but Wilhelm's aura was undoubtedly stronger. This old man's combat power was very strong. If John fought him head-on, he might lose. He could keep up with Silver Chariot's near light speed sword speed, and could quickly counterattack in such a fast attack, and gradually develop his advantages. He was a very dangerous person, John looked at the old man warily. The old man was also surprised by John's reaction speed and Silver Chariot's speed. The dignified middle-aged man put down the hand he was about to raise. This slight movement did not escape John's eyes. Sure enough, John guessed correctly, this middle-aged man was not a kind person either. Just now, John and the old man's battle was not something ordinary people could participate in. He just raised his hand to stop John and the old man, indicating that he was confident in stopping this fierce battle. John squinted his eyes, without further words. Satch was very happy, he didn't expect John's strength to be so strong, far beyond expectations. As long as these two people were transferred away and were responsible for different areas, it would be fine. This time, the team's strength far exceeded Satch's previous expectations. This lineup could deal with B-level missions. Satch breathed a sigh of relief, this time the certainty of the action was even greater. Hey, why do I have a bad feeling? Maybe it's just my imagination. Chapter 85. Soon, they would part ways. John and Lindsay were responsible for the northern part of the forest where the ruins were located, and John's task was to intercept any grave robbers coming from that direction. Satch provided the tents, food, and other living supplies, so John didn't have to buy them himself. This saved John some effort, since he was basically a man with a bounty on his head in the dark world. Even going out to buy small things could expose him through surveillance cameras. Satch sent John and Lindsay here to guard the surrounding environment, especially at night when visibility was poor. John and Lindsay could take shifts watching, since John wasn't a perpetual motion machine and couldn't stay on guard all the time. John didn't yet have any thoughts of transcending humanity, so he had Lindsay watch the surroundings while he rested. Of course, another reason was that John didn't trust outsiders. When John was asleep, his vigilance was very poor, he slept very deeply. This was a habit he had carried over from his previous life, and he hadn't had the chance to change it. John's martial arts teacher was Wilhelm, a ring fighting expert, so he hadn't taught John to develop the habit of staying alert while sleeping. John also had no way to learn this skill. All his enemies had always attacked when John was awake. If he were asleep, any assassin with a little strength could kill John. Remember that King Crimson's endurance was only C, so he couldn't keep Epitaph active all the time. However, John had discovered this weakness of his long ago. John knew how to develop the habit of staying alert and ready to counterattack while asleep. In the original story, Biscuit Kruger had forced Gon and Killua to train in this way, but John wouldn't suffer that kind of torture. Using the special properties of his stand, John used stone free to connect all the surrounding trees, forming countless thin, dense tripwires. If anyone broke these lines, John would bleed and be injured, waking him up immediately. This indirectly achieved the effect of guarding the surroundings. Although it sounded lame, it was useful. The prototype of this ability was Noriaki Kakyoin's 20-meter radius Emerald Splash. The principle was basically the same, but John's only had a warning function and no attack power. Before going to sleep each time, John would tell Lindsay not to run around and break his tripwires. Although Lindsay had learned Nen, her combat power was still weak. Her current abilities didn't help in combat at all. John also asked Sats to give Lindsay some guns and ammunition for self-defense. In fact, these guns were enough to deal with ordinary petty thieves. If these guns couldn't handle the opponent, then John would have to take action. Moreover, John specifically told Sats not to put silencers on these guns, so that even if Lindsay was in danger, John could determine her location by the sound and quickly rescue her. On the first day, there were a few petty thieves. John could easily deal with them even without his stand, but John didn't take action and instead let Lindsay, who had almost no combat experience, try it out. These people all carried guns, but they were all toy guns, the worst of the worst. The power was very touching, they had to be within 15 meters to effectively shatter a skull. In other words, if you stood far away, even if you hit the skull, you couldn't kill the opponent. These guns could kill chickens, but killing people or trained individuals would be difficult. But for Lindsay, who had just learned Nen and had no combat experience, these petty thieves were good practice opponents, and with John backing her up, there was basically no danger. Even if danger appeared, John could predict it in advance with Epitaph. And don't forget that John also had Ripple and Pearl Jam, two healing abilities that could be considered bugs. It wouldn't matter if Lindsay suffered some non-fatal injuries. Yotaku Town was originally an unknown, peaceful town. The town's main products for sale were timber and some agricultural byproducts. The environmental protection here was quite good. It was said that the town's mayor had ventured out for a while before and had a very long-term vision. While other cities were starting to develop industry, he didn't. He only developed agricultural byproducts and protected the environment, wanting to develop it into a tourist town. In recent years, it had indeed achieved results, with the number of visitors increasing year by year. Contrary to his wishes, the mayor's wish might be fulfilled in another way, unrelated to environmental protection. This was the valuable heritage that the town already had. Once this ancient ruin was developed, it would be easy to make a lot of money. The forest here was very dense, especially the area where John and Lindsay were located, which was completely covered by layers of ancient trees. It was okay during the day, but at night, it was impossible to see your fingers, and not a single ray of starlight could penetrate. John had collected a lot of firewood in advance, and he had a lighter, so he didn't have to spend effort starting a fire, which was very convenient. This time, Sats had prepared food for John in advance, all convenient military rations. Overall, it was not bad, but the taste was a bit salty, probably to replenish the soldiers' salt after a whole day of training. At night, John and Lindsay ate dinner by the campfire, watching the firewood burn and crackle. No one spoke during the meal. John was an awkward young man who was not good at talking. Lindsay was not a particularly lively person either, and no one spoke after the meal. But night had fallen, and layers of darkness enveloped everything around them. All the scenery became unclear. In the lonely and deserted forest, John's campfire was the only spot of light in the entire forest. The world seemed to fall into silence, because it was already autumn. Unlike the last time they were in the wild in the summer, most of the cicadas had already died. Without the noisy chirping of cicadas, there was a hint of fear. Although there were no cicadas chirping in the forest now, the cracking sounds of wild animals stepping on branches and the cooing of birds became the mainstream in the forest. Compared to the chirping of cicadas, these sounds were obviously more terrifying. The night was the world of wild animals. Basically, most wild predators were nocturnal animals. In the dark, their pupils emitted a faint green light. The darkness hid their bodies, making them look like ghosts floating in the air. It was because of these wild animals that John's tripwires lost their effectiveness. This was the third time that a running wildcat had broken the tripwires that John had laid down. Each time, he was awakened by these wild animals, but this time period was also the peak period for grave robbers to break in. Crack, crack, crack. John's heart tightened. This sound seemed to be from a large animal, but it could also be a person. Chapter 86. Ugh, shut up, you ignorant bastard. Can't a person get some sleep? John, with dark circles under his eyes, frantically searched for the enemy's location. The current situation was that he was in the light while the enemy was hidden in the dark. John's camp had a bonfire, which made it very conspicuous in the darkness. However, John's night vision goggles didn't detect any enemies, who were probably hiding behind some tree. John's body seemed to melt, splitting into countless fine threads that continuously extended outward. At the same time, ripples spread outward across the ground. I've already found you, come out. Lindsay, who was sleeping, was also awakened by John's voice. She rubbed her eyes and quickly entered battle mode, searching around for the enemy, but to no avail. John, where's the enemy? John ignored Lindsay's serious vigilance, and Lindsay realized that there was indeed an enemy. This wasn't a probe, John had indeed discovered the opponent's trail. Hey, Yuvajan, I told you your hiding skills are terrible. Bastard, it must be you who exposed me. My concealment skills are definitely flawless. A sturdy man wearing animal skins emerged from behind a large tree, and another man in a samurai outfit jumped down from the tree. John had only discovered the person standing behind the tree and hadn't noticed the one in the tree at all. The moment John heard that name, his heart clenched. If he wasn't mistaken, the man in animal skins should be Yuvajan, and the one in the samurai outfit should be his close friend, Nobunaga Hezuma. John's nerves were stretched to the limit. These two were combat personnel of the Phantom Troop. John couldn't beat either of them in terms of raw strength, but he should be able to retreat safely. What a pity. If you hadn't discovered us, you could have died painlessly in your sleep. But you wasted that opportunity, Nobunaga lamented. We finally get to play stealth once, and this kid ruins our fun. I can't wait to kill him, Yuvajan said impatiently. John's hand started typing a message to Sato's, saying it was dangerous here and they needed support. Nobunaga glanced at John. Are you sending a message to your teammates in other directions? It's useless. Nobunaga was indeed a seasoned veteran, and John's little trick was instantly seen through. Fighting these two opponents, a moment of carelessness could lead to instant death, so John hoped for some support for safety. Boom, bang, bang sounds came from the distant forest. There seemed to be an explosion and gunfight in the depths of the forest, but it quickly returned to silence. John understood what Nobunaga meant. There are more than just the two of us here this time. John understood Nobunaga's words. It was likely that a whole troop had come, and Nobunaga and Yuvajan just happened to be assigned to this direction. Damn it, then support from other directions couldn't be counted on. John directly threw his phone on the ground. Unlike Yuvajan's happy face and Nobunaga's helpless look, John's face was much uglier and very gloomy. Looking at John's face, Lindsay roughly understood what was happening. John rarely showed this expression, the last time was when dealing with the Baru crocodile, which meant that these two guys were very strong. John had to treat them with caution. The whole troop came? Why did they gather? It shouldn't be, Krollo shouldn't know my ability yet. Could it be just for the things in this relic? Is it worth the Phantom Troop mobilizing? John underestimated the value of this relic. The value of this relic might not be less than some small pyramids. Its historical significance even far exceeded some pyramids. John's face was very ugly. If it was just Yuvajan and Nobunaga, John, plus the two experts Sato's invited, could still defeat them, but if the Phantom Troop all ganged up, the only people in the world who could dissuade them all were probably Zaldik's ancestor and Hunter Association Chairman Netero. Jing Freaks was very strong, but his destructive power was insufficient. He might be able to defeat them one by one in a one-on-one fight, but facing them all at once, he might be willing but unable. Rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors. Even though they were humiliating John so much, ignoring John so much, John wasn't angry at all. Yuvajin 1, grinning as he walked towards John, very inflated, full of flaws, but anyone with a little nin ability wouldn't dare to step forward, because the layer of nin on his body was terrifyingly thick. It could be said that very few attacks could break his defense. Speaking of which, is that really Ren? Looking at the thick layer of nin aura wrapped around Yuvajin's body, John felt very unfriendly. If it wasn't for Kurapika's ability to force opponents into Zetsu, Kurapika probably wouldn't be able to break his defense. At the same time, John also moved, but Yuvajin on the opposite side didn't react at all, completely disdaining to defend against John's attack. This was his confidence in his own strength. Instead, he looked at John with interest, hoping John could give him some surprises. John reached into his clothes and took out a throwing knife from the hook on his clothes. Yuvajin's smile deepened. Ordinary bullets couldn't break his defense, even Gatling guns couldn't break through his defense, and heavy sniper rifles could hardly cause effective damage. The amount of John's nin aura determined that the power of John's throwing knives was very average. True. Mirror throwing knife random throwing technique. John threw all the throwing knives in his hand in one go, full of loopholes, without any skills to speak of. John never knew how to throw throwing knives, nor had he undergone specialized training. The power and accuracy were very touching. Yuvajin was also very annoyed. He didn't expect the attack he was looking forward to be such a weak throw. To be honest, even if Yuvajin didn't dodge, not many throwing knives could hit him. Yuvajin felt he was being looked down upon and was very angry. Are you looking down on me, kid? Yuvajin clenched his fist, nin aura gathering on his fist, accelerating towards John. Don't come over, be careful, Yuvajin. Nobunaga roared. Chapter 87. Waki immediately jumped back a few steps upon hearing Nobunaga's words, but John relentlessly pursued him. Damn it, Nobunaga, what's wrong with you? Why are you running? Waki said impatiently. What's the problem? Waki, take a good look around him. Nobunaga stared at John solemnly, as if facing a formidable enemy. The slender figure that had been beside John had completely disappeared, causing Waki's pupils to shrink. The disappearance was so sudden and without any warning that neither Waki nor Nobunaga saw how he vanished. Was it invisibility? Teleportation? Or some other ability? Lindsay was less than a meter away from John, and the clothes John wore were custom-made, covered in shiny, reflective ornaments. These ornaments could be used as mirrors, and John's flamboyant movements were to conceal the traces of the man in the mirror. When John was taking out the knife from his clothes, he used the clothes to block Nobunaga's line of sight. Although it was only for a moment, Waki had also stopped moving forward, waiting for John's attack, so John directly took this opportunity to knock Lindsay unconscious, use King Crimson to erase the time, and finally throw Lindsay into the mirror world. This series of actions was smooth and fluid, without many flaws. As for why John himself didn't run, he just wanted to test the strength of the Phantom Troop. Based on the original work, he guessed that the other members of the Phantom Troop were very confident in their teammates' combat abilities. If he didn't make a big commotion, it was unlikely that anyone would come. Throughout the entire Phantom Troop, John was most afraid of being ganged up on, as he couldn't withstand their combined assault. Secondly, he feared Phaeton, whose movement speed was extremely fast, and once he attacked, John might not have the chance to activate his abilities. Thirdly, he was wary of Crollo Lucifer, the leader, because John wasn't sure what abilities were in Crollo's skill hunter and whether there were any that specifically countered him. Moreover, John probably couldn't kill the leader, and once he attacked, there was a high probability that his abilities would be figured out. Then life would be difficult in the future, and he would definitely be hunted down by the troop. But running now would be too disloyal, and John could still control the situation. Holding back one of the Phantom Troop members was already the best he could do, and even afterward, no one would blame him. This was what John sought, a clear conscience. Okay, it was also because John disliked Waki. Damn it, coach, I also want to learn how to cheat. I'm a cheater, and I also have my pride. Since you're not giving me face, your path will narrow, so for Waki's future in society, John had to reluctantly educate him. John still had a bit of a childish side. In his previous life, he lived in peaceful China, and he transmigrated right after graduation, so he hadn't experienced the trials of society. After transmigrating, with the system, he could act as he pleased with his power. Therefore, John's childishness hadn't faded, and he still believed in love and justice. John's values determined that he would never collude with the troupe, but he was also rational and cherished his life. However, when his life was guaranteed, he was still willing to lend a hand. As long as his teammates didn't come, even if Waki and Nobunaga teamed up, they couldn't do anything to John. John's King Crimson and Man in the Mirror combination could attack and defend, so he wasn't afraid of anything. Nobunaga's sword speed might not be faster than John's silver chariot. It shouldn't be said that John didn't think Nobunaga could keep up with silver chariot. As for Waki, John was even less afraid. Lover's body, coupled with wire-like body, provided dual protection against being hammered, and besides, Stone Freeze A in both power and speed wasn't a joke. Waki's combat power shouldn't be much stronger than Wilhelm's, and he shouldn't be able to take down Stone Free in a short time. Sneak attacks were even more impossible. Did they really think King Crimson's epitaph was just for show? Nobunaga wouldn't interfere in Waki's battle. It shouldn't be said that none of the other troop members would interfere, as this was an unwritten rule within the troop. John directly rushed up, intending to fight Waki head-on. Waki was an enhancer, with a simple and straightforward mind, so he wouldn't care what John's abilities were. Since he dared to provoke him, he would definitely retaliate. In fact, Nobunaga didn't take John to heart. He was mainly guarding against the sneak attack from the disappeared Lindsay. He was very confident in Waki's strength. No matter what, he wouldn't be killed by such a kid. Even within the troop, not many people dared to say they could steadily defeat Waki. This kid wanted to compare close combat with Waki. It was simply like an old man eating arsenic, tired of living. But John didn't know that he was guarding against Lindsay and was also putting some attention on Nobunaga. Although Nobunaga's speed couldn't compare to Phaeton's, it was still at the upper level within the troop. The distance between John and Nobunaga could basically be ignored. If the two of them came together, John would have to consider running away. But John didn't have the mind to think so much anymore. Waki was already in front of him. With a wild and crazy aura, John seemed to have returned to the time when he was dealing with Barrow the giant crocodile. But now John's strength was not the same as it was then. Waki grinned, wielding his fist wrapped in nin. But Stone Free! A blue figure flew out of John's body at high speed. It shouldn't be said that it was a figure, only half a person came out. A blue fist magnified in Waki's vision. The warning lines that John had used for reconnaissance also surged from Waki's back, gradually entangling Waki. Aura 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 aura. Chapter 88. Rain-like fists struck Yuvajan's face. Stone Free's punches were so fast that only after images could be seen. John didn't have any professional ethics about not hitting faces, so he used Stone Free's speed to catch Yuvajan off guard without any guilt. A power speed A fist wasn't just for show. Even with nin covering him, Yuvajan was still getting hurt, with blood coming from his nose and mouth. Yuvajan was stunned for a moment. He hadn't anticipated Stone Free at all, nor had he expected John's counterattack to be so swift and powerful. The nin on his hands unconsciously surged to his face to defend against Stone Free's punches, which instantly dissolved Yuvajan's offense. He never imagined that John, with such weak nin, would have such offensive power. But it was only for a moment. Although he was beaten until his face was bloody and slightly deformed, and perhaps the bones in his face were damaged, that was all. It couldn't cause Yuvajan any more damage. At this time, Yuvajan had already reacted, his whole body being pushed backward by Stone Free's attacks. But John saw Yuvajan's expression, which was terrifying. His face, twisted by the aura barrage, revealed a frightening look. John wasn't sure if it was the anger of being deceived by John and gnashing his teeth, or the excitement of encountering an unexpectedly strong enemy, or perhaps both. John didn't know, and there was no time for him to guess. But John still took a few steps back, a strategic retreat. This wasn't because he was afraid of Yuvajan, but to conserve his strength and advance by retreating. Okay, actually, it was just that John was chickening out. It wasn't that he was afraid of being unable to win, but mainly that he was afraid of the pain. Although he had Lover's body and line manipulation, John's ability to withstand attacks should theoretically be stronger than Yuvajan's, but John wouldn't trade injuries for injuries, he was just simply afraid of the pain. Moreover, Yuvajan's punches weren't so easy to take. If he suddenly went all out, John still had to be prepared. Yuvajan's nin quantity and strength were top-notch, especially his strength, which was the strongest John had ever seen. But his fighting skills were very rough, and it was clear at a glance that he hadn't undergone systematic training. Yuvajan was completely relying on his physical advantages, suppressing his opponents with his superior strength and nin. He had never considered specifically learning any martial arts that combined offense and defense. Like a beast. Nobunaga on the side was also stunned, but more than that, it was a very complex emotion. One was that he didn't expect John to be so strong, causing Yuvajin to suffer such a big loss in close combat, and the other was that the disappeared person, Lindsay, didn't take the opportunity to attack, indicating that her attack power was either very weak, or she had already run away. But Nobunaga hadn't seen Yuvajin this excited in a long time. It shouldn't be said that Yuvajin hadn't seen someone who could fight him head-on without falling behind in so long. Although the members of the troupe were also very strong, they were either assassin types with high-speed movement like Phaeton, or ability plus intelligence types like Crollo. In a fight, Finks didn't dare to use his full strength, because once he used his full strength, it was difficult to stop, plus Crollo wouldn't let him mess around like that, so it was difficult to have a satisfying fight. He had longed for an opponent like John for far too long. Yuvajin's eyes were full of ferocity, exceptionally terrifying in the dark night. He was laughing maniacally. This was the laughter of a battle maniac. John felt very uneasy. Yuvajin couldn't use Super Destruction Fist in this kind of battle rhythm, which was John's confidence. Because Super Destruction Fist required gathering the nin of the whole body in the fist, but if Yuvajin used this move, John would be very happy. Without nin defense, without Yuvajin's terrifying KO, Stone Free with power speed A could instantly turn Yuvajin into mincemeat. Of course, John didn't dare and couldn't take Yuvajin's Super Destruction Fist, according to the original works standards. The dazzling fist shadows covered Yuvajin's whole body. Yuvajin also changed his strategy, crossing his hands over his head and launching a charge towards John. Although this charging method of collision had far less attack power than a fist condensed with nin, it greatly increased Yuvajin's defense. Looking at Yuvajin charging over like a boar, John didn't hesitate at all, raising his leg. Ora 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 ora. Sure enough, Yuvajin was once again hit hard and his charge was obstructed. Usually, the power of a leg is twice that of an arm, and the kicking power of a leg far exceeds that of a fist, but John's half-baked leg skills were really unsightly, and although the attack power was strong, there were loopholes everywhere. If he encountered a fighting expert, he might be caught by the pigtail. Most people in this world who have nin abilities know fighting skills. This isn't the Jojo world, and stand users who know martial arts are very rare. It should be said that in a world where stands are mainstream, martial arts are not very developed. Even if you use some moves with loopholes, no one will attack. When dealing with nin users in this world, John didn't dare to use many skills at all, such as Jolin's kicking skills. Although they were very strong, John, whose leg skills were weak, didn't dare to use them. But he wasn't afraid of this at all when dealing with Yuvajin. One was that Yuvajin didn't have such strong fighting skills, and two was that Yuvajin's posture didn't allow him to grab John's feet, so there was no such thing as a loophole. If it were someone else in the troupe, John would never dare to use this move. John stood on one foot, raising the other foot and firing wildly at Yuvajin like a machine gun. Every attack that could shatter steel plates landed on Yuvajin's body, and for a time, the sound of an awl pounding into mincemeat filled the area. Nobunaga's face was a little strained. Although he didn't go up to directly help Yuvajin, it could be seen that he was very nervous and worried about Yuvajin. "Do you need my help, Yuvajin? Stop playing around, or we'll be late. We might be the last group again." Of course, Nobunaga knew that Yuvajin wasn't playing around, but Yuvajin was indeed still testing John's limits, not attacking with all his strength. Nobunaga was telling Yuvajin to finish the battle quickly, lest things get complicated. "I know." John's eyes sharpened when he heard that. "Not using all your strength, stop playing around. Listen to what you're saying, is that human? You've been beaten like this, so stop showing off." Chapter 89. But John was wrong. "What a pity, time's up and I can't keep playing with you, so please die." Yuvajin suddenly became less simple, dodging John's attack. "Your nin beast's attack range is probably only 2 to 3 meters. As long as I'm outside that limit, your nin beast can't hit me, right?" Yuvajin wasn't stupid either. After fighting for so long, he could still see a clue. "But I have a question, can this nin beast be killed?" After speaking, he punched towards Stone Free. Originally, Yuvajin had been avoiding fighting Stone Free, his target had always been John, who was controlling Stone Free, but Yuvajin's sudden attack caught Stone Free off guard. Yuvajin punched Stone Free in the face, and Stone Free also punched Yuvajin in the face. Stone Free's fist hitting Yuvajan's already deformed face didn't show much, but John's head couldn't be completely linearized, so the punch landed on Stone Free's face. Because the stand was injured, the user would also suffer the same damage. A fist mark also appeared on John's face, and John covered his bleeding nose. Damn, that hurts, this punch was so heavy, even my teeth are a little unstable. Yuvajan seemed to have discovered a new world, watching John get hurt. I see, such a strong nin beast must have limitations. At first, I thought it was just the attack distance, but I didn't expect that the stand's injury would also be reflected on the user. That's your weakness. Finally discovered it, Yuvajan. Nobunaga grinned. Nobunaga, who was watching the battle from the sidelines, wasn't surprised at all, he had already guessed it. When John and Yuvajan were fighting just now, John instinctively controlled Stone Free to dodge Yuvajan's fist. Nobunaga had already made a guess. This nin beast might be difficult to regenerate or irreversible, or it might cause damage to the user after being destroyed. Looks like he found a weakness, Yuvajan. Nobunaga smiled, happy for his teammate. Now, all that's left is to exchange blows. Yuvajan's resistance to attacks is no joke. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't a fatal weakness for John, at least Yuvajan couldn't use this to kill John. John's resistance to attacks is definitely not weak, but John still strategically retreated. It's not because John can't take it, he can endure the pain, but John's teeth can't, because he didn't wear dentures before the fight, and that punch just now made John's teeth unstable. John didn't want to be forced to have a tooth extraction at a young age. John's teeth are all permanent teeth and can't be damaged. Once they're gone, they're gone. Yuvajan seized on John's pain and pressed his attack, but John had also learned martial arts after all, so running away all the time wasn't a solution, and John was still a bit self-aware to compete with Yuvajan, who was of the enhancement type, in terms of physical strength. John deliberately injected a large amount of nin into his teeth to maintain the stability of his teeth. Fighting head-on, who's afraid of who? John gritted his teeth and rushed up to fight Yuvajan head-on, which was exactly what Yuvajan wanted. Fists intertwined, and the air made a tearing sound. The powerful airflow generated by the collision of fists blew away all the surrounding leaves. The bonfire was also flickering in this strong wind. Nobunaga was also surprised by John's combat power. It had been a long time since he had seen someone who could fight Yuvajan head-on without falling behind. With such strong strength, he had never heard of this kid's prestige before. Looking at this kid, he couldn't be more than 20 years old. This shows that this is likely to be a talent. Yuvajan also realized this. You are so strong, why do you want to risk your life for them for so little money? Why don't I give you a chance and I will recommend you to join our troop, you can easily obtain wealth that you can't imagine. Moreover, the discipline within the troop is lax, you can do anything you want, as long as you accept the leader's summons in a small amount of time. Nobunaga was the most appreciative of talents in the Phantom Troop besides the leader, and he was also relatively easy to talk to in the Phantom Troop. Although the conditions are very generous, I refuse. John said with a serious face. John's 3 views are incompatible with the Phantom Troop, and they will definitely not go the same way. Although John can't be called a holy mother, he is definitely not an evil person. Therefore, John disdains to be with the Phantom Troop, who make a living by stealing, robbing, and killing. I refuse. That's even better, it seems you are ready to die. After saying that, Yuvajan rushed towards John again. If you can do it, try it. John didn't dodge or avoid, and directly confronted the enemy with Stone Free. The recovery speed of the two was comparable. John used the Sendo ripple breathing, and Yuvajan relied on the characteristics of the enhancement type nin ability to restore his body. But Nobunaga was still surprised, because from the beginning of the battle, no matter how Yuvajan launched his attack, John's breathing did not change at all. This is the state of mind and realm that only martial arts masters have. In fact, John is just used to using ripple qigong all the time. Maintaining the rhythm of breathing is a compulsory course and the foundation of ripple qigong. But Yuvajan didn't use the same reckless tactics as before. Yuvajan relied on his jumping ability to constantly jump to John's side to attack in a roundabout way, but Stone Free's reaction was still very fast, and Yuvajan's unexpected attack did not achieve any success. Then John was shocked, he saw his future of defeat in Epitaph, inexplicably. But John still kept an eye out. In the future predicted by Epitaph, John's chest was pierced by Yuvajan's fist, but John really couldn't figure out what kind of move Yuvajan would use. Yuvajan no longer rushed up to attack John, but instead gathered nin on his hands. What exactly is Yuvajin going to do? Super Destruction Fist can't hit John, it's impossible to even get close, what is he thinking? Chapter 90. Yuvajin's hands came together, his previous fist clenched into a claw. Could it be? John thought of something, but it was already too late. A radiant Nen bullet condensed in the center of Yuvajin's palm, and almost as soon as John reacted, the Nen bullet flew towards him. If John hadn't watched Dragon Ball in his previous life, he probably would have been caught off guard. This time's unpreparedness was entirely John's habitual thinking's fault. Yuvajin had never used this move in the original work because its power was insufficient. Enhancers rarely use emitter skills, but it doesn't mean they can't. John didn't expect the enhancer, Yuvajin, to use an emitter skill to attack him. The real killer move was the subsequent attack, but he had to block this move, which could be said to be a sure kill against John. John suffered from the disadvantage of his main body's movement speed. Although the stand was fast, the main body couldn't dodge. By the time John blocked the Nen bullet, Yuvajin had already approached John. Now there was no way to stop it. As soon as the Nen bullet dissipated, Yuvajin had already disappeared from sight. John caught a glimpse of Yuvajin out of the corner of his eye, already circling to John's left. It was too close to dodge, and Stone Free couldn't dissuade him. John laboriously turned his body, crossing his arms to protect his head, using Ryunin to gather Nen on his arms. Yuvajin's fist was aimed at John's head. Linearization can indeed reduce the damage of blunt strikes, but linearization has its limits. Once more than 70% of the body is linearized, the body will completely turn into a line and collapse, unable to maintain its human form. Moreover, the degree of linearization on the head is very low. The brain cannot be linearized, as can be seen from Jolin's fight against Si Moon Pucci. Most importantly, Yuvajin's full-strength blow would be difficult to block even with linearization. It was very tricky. But unexpectedly, Yuvajin's hand only rested on John's hands. Could it be? Yuvajin placed one hand on John's arms, or rather, restrained John's hands. John slightly understood Yuvajin's plan. All of this was driven by Yuvajin's beast-like battle intuition. It was truly terrifying that he could come up with a countermeasure against John in such a short time. Yuvajin relied on this kind of intuition to survive from Meteor City, a place full of villains, and get to where he is now. John's dream of suppressing Yuvajin with these slight speed advantages was wishful thinking, even John himself didn't believe it. Yuvajin had survived countless battles against opponents stronger than himself, becoming stronger step by step, so he still had some skill. Yuvajin didn't attack the front of John's head, which had the strongest defense. It should be said that he had guessed from the beginning that John would defend in this way. Yuvajin's real target was John's chest. Because John was defending his head, all of his Nen was concentrated on his arms, which increased the defense of his arms, but at the same time, the Nen in other parts of his body decreased, and the defense weakened accordingly. Yuvajin only had very little Nen on one hand, but he grabbed John's hands, making it impossible for John to intercept. Stone Free also launched an attack, but Yuvajin forcibly endured it with his physical abilities. His other hand, condensing a large amount of Nen, punched towards John's chest. Yuvajin's powerful and heavy punch unexpectedly pierced through John's chest. He won, Nobunaga thought, without any joy. Perhaps he had seen this kind of situation too many times. Having known Yuvajin for so many years, although he had been in countless dangerous situations, Yuvajin could turn the tables every time. Frankly speaking, the threat posed by John was far from enough. Yuvajin's right hand passed through John's left chest. If John's heart wasn't on the right side, it would have been a certain kill. In fact, even if the right heart suffered such great damage, it would basically lose its combat power. But Nobunaga found this scene very awkward, but he couldn't say why. Unlike Nobunaga, who was watching from the outside, Yuvajin truly realized that things were very strange. Yuvajin passed through John's chest without any resistance. It was too easy. After only 0.1 seconds, Yuvajin noticed John's abnormality. John's chest seemed to be undefended. No, it should be said that it was more like punching a ball of air. There was no obstruction, not even the feeling of flesh and blood of an ordinary person. The fist seemed to be plunged into a ball of hot clothing rather than human flesh and blood, without feeling any blood flow. No, Yuvajin glanced slightly and saw that John's chest was not bleeding at all, without any bloody smell. At the same time, Nobunaga also noticed this. There was no blood on Yuvajin's fist that pierced John, and the air lacked the usual strong bloody smell. John predicted the fate of his chest being pierced through epitaph, so before Yuvajin attacked, he completely linearized the chest area and created a hollow. Similar to the Mobius strip used by Jolin to deal with Sea Moon Pucci. John used this hollow to make Yuvajin's fist hit empty air. Not only that, but just now, John had also made some preparations. Trash, what the hell is going on? Yuvajin pulled his arm with all his might, but it didn't move at all. It shouldn't be said that his whole body couldn't move. Yuvajin was now completely at a disadvantage. While Yuvajin was wholeheartedly attacking him, John secretly wrapped threads around Yuvajin, slowly crawling the thinnest threads into Yuvajin's nostrils and ears. Because concealment was required, the threads were very thin, basically invisible in the pitch-black night, and John didn't even dare to Adnan for fear of Yuvajin using Gyo. Just now, John injected Ripple Anan into Yuvajin's body through the threads, temporarily causing Yuvajin's nerves to lose their normal function, so Yuvajin couldn't move temporarily. Yar days! I almost got killed by you. John said with a gloomy face. If Epitaph hadn't foreseen it in advance, he might really have died. Anyone would be annoyed when they were almost killed. Stone Free instantly appeared in front of John. Aura.